So I am a visual effects editor, but I also consider myself first and foremost an assistant editor. I was doing some thinking about my career and I realized I joined the guild in 2005 or 6. I don't actually remember because I've become a parent and I've also hit 40 this year. So you start to lose, you forget like what year it is sometimes, you forget how old you are, you forget when things happen. But I joined the guild about 12 years ago, and as I was thinking about my career and the odd trajectory it's taken, I realized that I haven't gotten or taken an assistant editing credit since 2008, I think, which is really something because I still consider myself, first and foremost, an assistant editor. So I think the thing here that I wanted to talk about is that there really is no such thing as a visual effects editor. And every one of you is a visual effects editor as much as I am, because it's an artificial distinction, and that distinction is getting more and more blurry as time goes on. I think probably everyone in this room has at some point been asked to knock together some kind of temp comp. What I don't want to do is, waste everyone's time going over fine-tuning techniques. How to make it look really amazing. I'm sure there are people in here who are better at it than I am, but we all sort of have to balance needs and balance expectations. But the truth is, more and more, the job of the assistant editor is to take care of visual effects as much as it is to take care of sound, take care of music editing. There's stuff in the guild contract or in the collective bargaining agreements or whatever between the guild and the studios that says that there's like work or whatever it is, that we can be called upon to do work that's similar to other classifications. So even though you're not in the guild as a sound editor, you are expected to be able to do some sound work. And the same is true of visual effects now. And more what we're seeing is that every picture, every show is a visual effects show. I think everyone has probably read those articles or heard anecdotes, stories from buddies or whatever about working on a romantic comedy where there were 300 visual effects shots, and most of them were wrinkle removal or some other kind of cosmetic fix. And that's not stuff that you can really do in the Avid, but tracking it and managing it and dealing with it is part of the job at this point. Everyone understands the primary role of a visual effect, right? The role of a visual effect is to move the story forward, tell the story. So that's why I think it's fair that assistant editors have to understand some of this stuff, have to understand how visual effects work, have to understand how to knock together some kind of temp comp, because it's become just another element of the storytelling package or the storytelling process. A good visual effect moves the story forward. It's a shot. It's a discrete shot within a cut that helps drive things forward visually or emotionally, and sometimes you just can't tell the story without it. So there is a real place for visual effects in every movie, and the question that we want to talk about, I guess, today is the utility of temping and the utility of, or sort of like, what's the purpose of temping, and what's reasonable to expect an assistant editor to do. With that in mind, I guess I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about what makes a visual effect. What is a visual effect? I see a lot of faces in here that are people who have been working for a long time, I think, and many people who remember the days of doing everything optically. So once upon a time, anything, a simple dissolve was basically a visual effect. You don't need a composite, you don't need multiple elements to come together to make a visual effect. A visual effect can be a treatment, a filter on one element. And once upon a time, everything had to go out optically, and you had to wait for something to come back, and you couldn't even have a dissolve on your work print until you'd have that line, that diagonal line running through the work print that was a placeholder for a dissolve. So the question we have sometimes is, what is a visual effect? How do you categorize these things? What counts as a visual effect that's worth doing, doable in the Avid, doable by your DI facility or wherever you're finishing, and what needs a vendor? So there are kinds of shots that I think probably maybe not everyone in this room has done, but I certainly have done. Like, somebody has asked me to take out the highlights in somebody's eyes, or add a glow to somebody's eyes. And, depending on the show you're on, that may be a visual effect, or it may not be. It may be something that is handleable by the colorist at the facility where you're finishing. Something like green spill, if you're shooting on a set that's full of green screens and you've got what you think is safe coverage of actors not against the green, and then you realize there's some green spill all over their face. How do you deal with that? I mean, it's something that you want to fix in the Avid. It's something that you're going to do in the Avid, but when the time comes to finish the show, are you going to call it a visual effect, or are you going to just ask the DI to do it? And these days, what we think of as opticals are, blow-ups and some speed changes and power windows and things like that. But there are other things that can be done by a finishing house that don't require a vendor. And part of the whole job of an assistant editor who's acting as visual effects editor when there is no visual effects editor, because I think that's the reality for a lot of people, is that you're assisting on a show where you don't get to hire a VFX editor, and much as you might like to hire someone to worry about all that stuff, it's a heavy line item for anyone who's budgeting the show, and you have to, as an assistant editor without a support network, without a support crew of the visual effects department, have to deal with answering these questions at some point. Is something a visual effect, or is it an optical that can wait? And so part of your job is going to be to evaluate the shot, evaluate the scope of work. I mean, obviously a dissolve these days is done in DI, but there are other things that sometimes your DI facility can do. If you have, if you're working on something where your colorist is getting paid $1,000 an hour, you're going to end up having a sort of a war at times between your producer, the show producer, who says it's not a visual, or it is a visual effect because he doesn't want to pay your DI facility to do something, and your visual effects department who's saying it's not a visual effect, it's something that should be done in DI. And sort of figuring that stuff out can be tricky, but the key to it all is communication and agency, taking charge and being proactive, and talking these things out ahead of time, as much ahead of time as possible. So sort of identifying what needs to happen to the picture and starting a dialogue and leading, sort of driving that conversation as the assistant editor. I come from a background where the first assistant editor on a show has really an enormous amount of authority. And unfortunately, I think we all know that there are times when that authority is really being undermined and eaten away. But the truth is that a good first assistant has the experience and the wherewithal, the know-how, to sort of start to figure out early what these issues are going to be, and how to push conversations forward. And of course, at some point, that conversation that the first assistant might have is, we need a VFX editor, and or we need a compositor to come on even. But first and foremost, just understanding your editor's needs and understanding the needs of the story, and kind of figuring out, okay, long term, how are we going to achieve those needs, and who needs to know, who do I need to talk to? This is all a big part of it. And being a VFX editor, I have the benefit usually of working with a very big crew, a lot of support, coordinators, PAs, producers, production managers, all that stuff. But my job as the VFX editor is to sort of have one foot in each world. I've got multiple masters here. I'm working for the editor and therefore the director, but I'm also working for the visual effects department. And being the bridge, being the liaison between the two is something that's really what separates a professional visual effects editor from just a regular assistant editor who happens to be good at compositing. When we think of visual effects, we think of like, you've got your person on a green screen and then you've got a background element and the two go together with a chroma key and there's your visual effect. But there's also stuff more and more these days. Editors and directors want to try just ginning something up out of nothing almost, or completely repurposing pieces of footage to create something that they wish they had shot, but they didn't shoot. What's up?
It's called Frankensteining.
Frankenstein. Thank you very much. Thank you. I mean, I've got 1,000 examples of such a thing, but let's say you've got a wide shot of a town and you've got your actors grouped together in a scene that's somewhere else, and somebody decides, well, look, we really need to establish them in this location. Can we cut them out of this one place and put them into this other place? And that is the kind of thing that you could reasonably be expected to try to hack together in the Avid, because without seeing it, you don't have the story point. You don't have the utility of that shot is markedly changed, or it suffers somehow. If you have a wide shot and you've got text over it that says our group stands in this shot, then it doesn't really serve the needs of the show, typically speaking. So you might be called upon to find a different group shot, say a medium shot of everyone, and knock them into that wide shot and make it look decent enough that people don't bump on it when they're watching it down. So what about stuff that's cleanup? I mean, when the boom drops into the frame, or a C-stand is visible in the shot, there's a question in my mind about whether there is any utility in doing those kinds of shots. I'll do them, I guess I'll do them as needed, cleanup shots. And when we get to a stage where we are previewing or showing the studio, the expectation now on big shows is that everything has to be done. So I do that kind of stuff, of course. And on smaller shows, actually, I might finish those shots in the sense that I worked on a TV show once where the finish happened on an Avid, essentially. We sent Avid sequences to a facility where they brought the sequences online in Symphony and linked up to high-res media and took some of the easy optical type stuff, like cloning in part of a clean background to get rid of a boom that's dropping in, and our work that we had done in the Avid just sort of translated over and was magically done. But things like wire removals and every little sliver of green, more and more you're kind of being expected, to do all of that stuff. And there does come a time where, as an assistant editor, you have to sort of manage people's expectations and say, I can't do all of that. It's not worth it to have me do all of that. I've got other things to do. So, and hopefully you have people who are somewhat receptive to that. You've got, producer or director who understands, and they say, well, look, if we need to see this done, we can hire somebody else. I would like to think that, that if you've got the job as the assistant editor on a show, you have some credibility and some authority to be able to determine for yourself whether a shot needs doing or whether you should be doing it in the first place. But a lot of times you do need to do it because simply a joke doesn't land, or a moment is confusing without having done the effect. So the question is sort of, where do you start when someone asks you to do an effect for them? Where do you start? And to me, the biggest pitfall that I've found in my career with this stuff is not knowing where to start and just winging it. Because what can happen then is you've got something that's sort of Frankenstein, as Bronwyn said, and you don't know if it's really going to work in the long term. And you know, a lot of times you have stuff where the reason you're being asked to do an effect is to see if it's possible, because they need to know, they have an idea for how to tell the story, where they need to know if something is even possible. And once upon a time, many years ago, actually, I believe it was the show where I got my very first visual effects editing credit, where I was hired just as a second assistant, but by the end of the show, I had managed and temped, 300 shots, and they sort of decided, okay, we can give you a visual effects editing credit. And we had a scene where, for structural reasons and pacing reasons, we wanted to remove one of the principal actors from the scene entirely. And being young and green, I had a lot of doubts about whether such a thing was possible. And of course, the truth is everything is possible for a price at this point. But they came to me and they said, Ethan, can you map out, go through the scene and map out, flag all the shots where this actor appears, and then let's come up with a strategy for how to get him out. And the good news was that in a lot of shots, we could blow up a wide shot where he was sort of at the edge of the frame. We could blow it up and just push him out. And in certain other shots, we could just avoid covering, we could avoid those medium shots where there's 3 people, cut a lot in close-ups, which of course I don't like, but it certainly was a way to solve the problem. But the biggest problem was the 2 wide shots that got us into the scene, where we had 2 characters that we were actually pulling down an alley with a Steadicam. And so the way we got into the scene was 2 people walking down a dark alley full of steam and neon lights and stuff like that. And one of them was supposed to not be in the scene. And the feeling was, we can't get into the scene without this shot. How do we get this guy out of the shot? And they asked me, well, do you think it's possible? And this movie didn't really have a visual effects team. It had a visual effects executive at the studio who was managing it a little bit, but it was really me. And it was, I did a lot of learning on that one. But they asked me, is it possible? And I said, I don't think so. This was just me thinking about I knew what our visual effects budget for the show was. It was only about $500,000 for the entire show, which may sound like a lot to some people, but given the needs of the planned visual effects on the show, it was actually not a lot at all. And I thought about our vendor, who was a sole vendor and who was very beleaguered at that point and underwater on the shots that were planned. They were really struggling to do the shots that were planned. And so in my mind, I thought, no, we can't do this. It's going to cost too much, it's going to take too much time, and we don't have the elements. We don't have a clean plate. How do you paint this guy out? And they said, well, you know what? It's no big deal. Take a couple hours, see if you can knock it together. And if you can do it, well, then they can do it a lot better. And so that's what I did. And I sort of winged it, and I found little tiny pieces of background, and I stitched them all together, and I tracked them all in. And back then I had no idea what I was doing with any of this stuff. But I got it to work. And the way I got it to work was with about 15 layers of little tiny pieces of stitching a background together, tracking that in over the top of the guy, and then trying to comp in some bogus looking smoke and steam to cover the seams and take the curse off of the ugliness of it. But in the end, actually, it took me about 6 hours to do maybe 5 hours to do, and it was actually pretty damn close to final at that point. The problem was, I had to turn it over at some point, and when I went to turn it over, I had no idea what to do. I had no idea how to tell the vendor to do what I had done. And it was great because everyone was thrilled that the shot was done, and now we had a completely different scene. We were able to get into the scene without one of our leads, and then for the rest of the scene, cut around him or move him out of a shot by blowing up and pushing over. But then the question was, well, how are we going to do it for real? And who's going to do it? Can the company that's doing all our other shots do it to the standard that we need when, you know, this thing gets finished? And Ethan, can you turn it over? Can you give it to them? And I didn't know how to do any of that stuff, really. I mean, I had done some of it, but you know, I found myself going back through my work, and it took me just as long to unpack it as it had taken to comp it. And that's not good. That's not efficient, and it's not a good way to work. So part of what I want to talk about today with some of my examples has to do with sort of coming into a shot with a plan and setting yourself up for future flexibility and future efficiency, and knowing how to turn something over and sort of keep yourself organized and work to the best of your ability. Just one other little simple example of something that can be done in the Avid that you might think is a visual effect, but in the end it turns out not to be. The show I did before that, I was the assistant editor. It's the last show I ever worked where I took the credit as an assistant editor. And even on that show, I did about 250 visual effects. And it was the first time I really ever tried any of this stuff. And there was a scene where we had people walking and talking, and there were two principals in the foreground and then one guy sort of in the background following. And the editor, we screened the editor's assembly for the director, and we got a very funny note from the director, which was, the guy in the background, who was one of our leads, he's distracting. His shirt is too bright. It's bright red, and it's really distracting from the scene. Can we do anything about that? So the editor asked me, what can you do about that? Can you take the color, change the color of his shirt? And I said, oh, gee, I'm sure I can, but I don't know how. He said, well, maybe you'll have to roto. Does everyone here know what roto means? Right? Is there anyone who doesn't know what it means? Okay, great. So I can avoid talking about how we got to that term. Knowing the lingo is really important. Roto, key, all this stuff. This is actually really important to know. So if I ever use a term and you don't know what it means, please ask me. Does everyone know what a holdout mat is?
No.
No. Okay, great. That's what we're going to work on in just a few minutes. But I want to just finish this one other thing. It was the first time I ever used the Animat tool. And I think a lot of you in this room probably have had to use the Animat tool to do roto at some point, and you found it pretty painful. So the first time I ever used it was when I had to cut out a guy who was walking. I had to cut out his flannel shirt, which was bright red, and try to turn it some other color. And it didn't dawn on me for many years, and I did an okay job. And when I turned over that show, that was one of these little bullshit movies where there's no post-production schedule. The producer was a friend of the director. The money came from the director. It's all self-financed. He was independently wealthy. And they didn't have any idea what they were doing, so there was no post schedule. When the director's cut was done, the editor and I were both cut loose. And the whole movie was just turned over to one finishing facility, which was also our lab. So it was this place on the East Coast in Philadelphia that was our dailies lab, it was our VFX facility, and it was our finishing house. And this is the first time I ever had to turn over a movie to, give the whole thing to sound, give the whole thing to music, and give the whole thing to those guys who are going to make it look good somehow. And I had an Excel spreadsheet that had a list of all the shots that I thought were visual effects, which now when I think about it, it's very funny because there were stuff like dissolves and other simple transitions in there. So it was really like an optical and visual effects list in an Excel with time codes in the locked reels, and whatever else I could think of that might be helpful. Because basically they were going to have me turn over the Avid bins with the finished locked reels and just let them take it from there. Well, they called me on my last day and said, we need lineup sheets. And I said, what's a lineup sheet? And they said, well, it's, this, we'll email you an example. And I said, okay. I got the example, I looked at it, I said, oh my God, I have no idea what this is, how to do it. It was a handwritten lineup sheet back then. And so I called them back and I said, what do you need lineup sheets for? Which shots? And they said, oh, about 80 of these things. And so I stayed all night and I handmade 80 lineup sheets for what were the real visual effects. Because as it turns out, a lot of the shots in the movie that I thought were visual effects were not. And that roto job of me cutting that guy out and where he's walking down, he was walking through a cemetery and he had this bright red flannel shirt and other people were walking in front of him, and I had to change the color of his shirt and knock out all the red and make it just sort of a gray and black check pattern. It wasn't a visual effect. That's something that at that finishing facility probably ended up just being a DI thing. I'm sure they just twiddled a couple of knobs in the DI and knocked his shirt way down. And at the time I had no idea that you could do something like that in the Avid as well. So that's another thing that hopefully I'll get to, is how to avoid roto in a situation like that where you don't need it. Does everyone hopefully already know about the spot color effect?
No.
No. Does anyone know how to use the magic mask?
No.
Okay, have any of you guys seen the magic mask parameter in one of your other effects and wondered, what the heck does that thing do? Okay. Is everyone here familiar with the paint tool? More or less, sort of. Paint tool is a effect that lets you draw shapes and move them around and change the shape, animate the shape. And what's really cool is there's all these modes for paint tool that I think most of us haven't really explored. And they let you do some pretty powerful things. So hopefully we'll be able to get to a couple of those things. I'm going to move on to building an example comp. I've got a piece of footage here that Richard Sanchez was very kind and provided me with. And he hooked me up with this because I had all these great ideas about the temps that I'm doing on the movie that I'm working on right now. And, I can't wait to show how I did this cool thing. Not going to happen. I did talk to my post super about it, and she said, no, sir. There'll be a pretty big violation of the NDA. And I said, I know, but, come on. She said, no, can't happen. So I came up with another one that is an example that's very similar to one of the shots that I have in mind that was really, really challenging. And it does involve a lot of heavy roto, and I'm going to show you that one too in just a minute. First, we're going to get through this one. When Richard gave me this footage, I said, what am I supposed to do with this? This happens to be some footage that the Guild either owns or they've been allowed to use. And I said, well, what am I supposed to do with this thing? I mean, who would ever ask for an effect here? Would we be talking about, putting his head from a different take on his body? That's something that, I think everyone knows, like David Fincher does that kind of stuff. Would we be talking about changing the timing of, part of his body, like when he moves his arms? Would it be possible to change the timing of that or take it out altogether while preserving the natural movement of his body and his speaking? Those things are possible. They're a little bit more advanced than I'd like to get into today, though. So I had to think about, well, what else might work here? And Richard had the idea of, he said, this is actually a good clip for roto. And I said, really, roto? What do you see happening here that would require roto? And he said, well, what if we put something behind him? And so the longer I thought about it, the more I started to realize actually it's a really great teaching clip, because there's so many concepts that I can cover just by wanting to put something on the wall behind him. So let's talk about how we do that. I've got a 2-minute long clip, I think, about 2 minutes. Now that's never going to be in the movie. What's really going to be in the movie is probably a couple of seconds. So I made a little sub clip here, and it's supposed to represent, I'm just going to cut it into a sequence, because it's supposed to represent a shot in the film. And you can imagine, I'm going to pull up my title tool real quick, and come on, title tool. Oh, go away. Here we go. This is from scene 14, so I'm going to call this scene 14, and I'm just going to make a little slug. And we're going to cut it in somewhere. Come on, cut in. Oh, there we go. So here's scene 14. Normally, you'd have your visual effects represented by a slug like this. Back in the work print days, you would have a slug, just a black slug with words on it that would say visual effect here, like if it was a spaceship shot or something like that. Like there are anecdotal tales of people watching work print of Star Wars where there was just black slug in there that said what was supposed to happen. And these days, you might work on a show where the editor actually just cuts in a piece of black slug like this and says what he wants to see. Sometimes editors do that for insert shots and pickups, you know? We need an insert here of somebody's watch or somebody's phone, and we didn't shoot it, so we'll use a title card to represent that. I've worked with editors who do the same thing for visual effects, and they leave it up to me to figure out what's going in there. So black slug, in some cases, represents an expected visual effect, but in this case, it's going to represent a scene, because I'm really only going to work on one shot, and here it is. So we're going to roll this 8, and roll this back 8. We're going to pretend that this shot is 1 second and 8 frames, 32 frames in the edit. And the editor comes to you one day and he says, okay, watch this scene and tell me what you think. And you're watching it and he says, now wouldn't it be cool if he had a poster on his wall and it's something important to the character development, it's something funny. And tomorrow, is anyone coming tomorrow? If you want to work with this scene tomorrow, I've got a couple of images that you can work with. One of them is this framed photograph from my house called Bill Murray's head. And that is in fact Bill Murray on the Brooklyn Bridge, and it's the back of his head. That one, I took that picture, I tried to get it just right for this shot. And so that's the one that I'm going to use today. But tomorrow, I thought it'd be funny if we could use this awesome framed one sheet on linen that somebody just gave me, one of my favorite movies, The Road Warrior, Mad Max 2. Because who knows, maybe you're working for an editor who thinks this scene will be a lot funnier if this guy is a closet Mad Max fan and decides to decorate his office with something like that. Now usually what really happens is, at least in my experience, what you get is let's imagine that up here on his desk is a framed photograph facing him of his family. And your editor has decided that they never want to cut to that framed photograph. They never want to cut to the insert of the framed photo. What they want to do instead is put it on the wall behind them. That's the kind of shot that I end up somehow doing a lot. And what you find is that it doesn't match, it doesn't line up. You know, so you go to your insert shot where they shoot an insert of the picture on his desk, and this is what they're asking you to put on the wall behind him. And you go, well, oh shoot, it doesn't fit, it's not right. Sometimes you have to cut out a photo and put it into an existing frame. Like sometimes they do cut to the frame on his desk, but they don't like the photo that's in there. So they ask you to put a different photo in there. And the photo that they give you is from some other scene in the movie, like from his house. And it's on the wall in a shot where it's a moving shot and you pan past it. And so you think to yourself, oh, I gotta grab a freeze frame of this thing and somehow get this picture that's on the wall in his house into his office in a completely different environment, in a different frame or on a wall or whatever. So this was my thought about how to do this shot. So here we start with our scene 14, and we've got our close-up of this guy. And the first question you want to ask is, do I need to work to handles? Some editors, depending on where you are in the schedule, they will ask you to give them temp comps with handles. So we're going to do that with this one. So we're going to match frame out, right? Everyone knows how to do that. And gang them up and go back and forth like this. And we're pretending this is the master clip. Actually, I will match frame out to the master clip. So there we go. We've marked the area that we need. And we're going to go back 8 frames and forward 8 frames. And we think 8 frames is a reasonable handle length to use. So we're going to subclip that in and put it in a bin and get out of the reel. We want to close out of that reel. Give it back to the editor. Don't do our work in that reel. But generally speaking, best policy is you make a new bin just for this temp, and you start with an empty bin with just a clip in it. And so here we are. This is our clip that we're going to work with. It's now, oh, looks like I goofed. We'll just use my pre-made subclip then. I didn't pull 8 frames on either end. Here we go. 48 frames long. So I'm going to cut it into a sequence all by its lonesome. Does everyone here know what the word pre-comp means? Okay, so this is a good piece of industry lingo that's going to help you out, I think, at some point. Sometimes, so the unnamed picture I'm working on has a few interesting shots, close-ups of people's tattoos, okay? So there's a particular vendor that's going to do all the tattoos in the movie. We've bid it out and we've figured out who's going to do the tattoo shots. And we've got these people with tracking markers on their bodies somewhere. I can't tell you where. But they're going to get tattoos put on their bodies. And there's like 15 or 20 of these shots. Well, what if they're also in front of a green screen? What if they're also riding on a vehicle that's got to be CG? And the company that's going to do the CG or the green screen isn't the same company that's going to do the tattoo. You have a situation where what you need is a pre-comp. You get one vendor to do a pre-comp, which is where they take the element, the plate, and they deliver a finished version of the tattoo wherever it goes. And then they hand that version off after you've finalized the work. They hand off that pre-comp to the vendor who's going to do the real work, the big CG battleship or whatever it is, and put that in there. So pre-comping is also a concept that I want to talk about today as being incredibly useful to you guys. This is how we're going to avoid sort of not just Frankensteining, but going in without a plan. So for me, a big part of doing a temp is planning effectively so that in the future, if I need to make changes to the temp, it's really easy. And that's one of the hardest things to plan for, is how to make changes in the future. If it's a complicated temp and somebody decides they don't like what you did and you got to change something important about it, particularly like with roto. Has anyone ever spent 2 hours rotoscoping somebody and then you give it back and they say, well, that's great, but you made that person too big in the shot. Please redo it and make him half as big. Has anyone ever had to do something like that? What do? Do you redo all the roto? Most of us think we have to redo all the roto. We don't. Not if we plan carefully and do what's called a pre-comp. So we'll get there. So this is our shot. It's 48 frames long. And the editor has chosen Bill Murray's head. wants to put Bill Murray's head on the wall behind this guy. And this is the best piece of footage that you've found. How do you identify that? You go through all your footage, you try to find the thing that most closely matches, and this is what you come up with. Is this going to be a usable element long term? But let's presume that this is a finish-worthy element. How do you guys think I should approach this thing? You think I should just start slapping it in there? I'm going to say no. So I want to talk about pre-comping this element and pre-comping this element separately before I composite them together. So first things first, I think we're going to try to put that poster on the wall, or that framed photo on the wall right here behind this guy. And we're going to run into a problem, which is that it's going to overlap this thing. And that's not going to look too good. I don't like how that thing looks anyway. It sort of breaks the frame for me. So I want to get rid of it and give myself a nice clean plate. So we're going to first pre-comp this guy into what I call a clean plate element. So where's my sequence? Here we go. We're going to call this thing 14 Baker 1 pre-comp element. So the only thing that we really need to do to this shot beforehand is just get rid of that. So I'm going to use the paint tool to do that. And I'll show you how. I'm going to call up my palette and go to image, and there we have paint. So we just drag that on there. Everyone knows how to do that. And here we got our shapes. Ooh. That's not what the paint tool's for, turns out. It's not really for drawing stuff. Once in a while I use it for drawing stuff, but it's got all these other modes. So right over here, we're going to change the mode to clone. Okay, because the way I'm going to get rid of this thing, the best way I know how, is by just copying texture, copying stuff here, and moving it up. So the way the clone works is, you decide how you're going to draw your shape. I'm going to start with just a rectangle. And I'll draw that rectangle. And for now, I'm actually going to change it back to a solid. I'm going to go into my workspace here, my effects editing workspace. There we go. Maybe that'll make it a little easier for me to see and for everyone else to see. I highly recommend building yourself a dedicated effects editing workspace for this kind of thing. Avid finally made it possible to, up here, let's see, go back to show dual, show single monitor, and make this window as big as you want it, which we've all been clamoring for. Those of us who do a lot of temp comps, we've been asking for that for a very long time. So it's finally here, and I've built myself a workspace that incorporates this view. So here's my shape. Everyone know how to change the shape once you've already drawn it? Double click, thank you. Dang it, what's going on here? All right, so I'm gonna say this area of brick here, these cinder blocks here. Oof, I'm having a hard time with this mouse today, folks. Sorry about that. But I'm gonna try to clone this area of bricks and move it up. So the way I do that is I draw the shape more or less where I want it, and then I change the mode from solid to clone. And it's invisible right now because it's just showing me the area that I want to clone, but as soon as I grab it and move it, ooh, look at that. So that's how we're going to do this. We're going to clone a piece of the wall. And then, of course, you can grab your edges of your shape and change the amount of softness and feathering, right? Everyone knows how to do that, I'm sure, I hope. If you don't, I hope you'll come tomorrow and I'll show you up close and personal how to do this stuff. And anti-aliasing Do you guys know what that does? That's for when you have a curved or diagonal line and it has that stair step appearance. Anti-aliasing does its best to mitigate that. So because I've changed this from a perfect rectangle with perfect horizontal lines and perfect vertical lines, I'm going to turn on anti-aliasing.
Why wouldn't you use it?
Why wouldn't you?
Yeah. Why doesn't it come standard? Why do you have the choice? When would you not use the anti-aliasing?
It takes longer to render.
Oh.
It affects real-time playback. So anti-aliasing, you know, if you zoom in on a piece of text, you know, you zoom way in on your font, and you see how the edges of the text have like a gray shade. Like there's not a hard edge to a rounded shape, like the letter D or whatever. You know, that belly of the D has like varying shades of gray that go away toward white to soften that edge, so that when you zoom out, you get the illusion.
Down. It's just weighing down the effect.
Exactly, yeah. So anti-aliasing, usually I work with it because these days, I mean, I tend to just click it by default because these days, the computers are powerful enough to render this kind of stuff quickly or even in real time. So I'm not unhappy with how that looks, but now luckily for us, we don't have to track it in. That's a whole other ball of wax. I'm going to blow that away and blow this away. And just because I can, I'm going to take my, where is it here? Geez, oh, here we go. That's the one I did last night at about midnight. I knocked this temp together at about midnight last night. So there's actually two shapes in here. Oh, there's a shape up there. What's that second shape in my paint effect? That's what it is. It's a second clone. So I cloned some of this matte and moved it back over here to cover up where my clone of the wall was breaking the frame.
Couldn't have cropped it?
Say again?
Couldn't you have cropped it?
I could have, sure. But this is accomplished with one effect, the paint. So rather than crop the image, if I wanted to crop it, I'd have to stack another, you know, a 3D warp on there. And part of keeping things organized is, for me, I want to know, sometimes I work with a lot of assistant editors who are really good at compositing, but I'm the guy who has to unpack it afterwards and figure out what they did. And I find a lot of unnecessary layers in there, nested effects and nested deeper and deeper, and I find weird things that aren't helpful. They don't actually make the comp sing, they don't make the comp better, they don't make the comp more organized or easy to unpack. And a crop is a 3D warp or resize function, and it's not something that I wanted to add onto this. I wanted to keep this.
In fact, if you can talk about how auditioning things that they are all nested, it would be very helpful.
If I can talk about which?
How auditioning, what's been nested.
What?
Like, like I have like all the stuff that they're nested, and I open it up and I don't know which one is which, but I can
Sure, yeah, no, of course. Once we get to the comp, you'll start to see how you can do that. But of course, what I'm trying to teach here is how to avoid that in the first place. Hopefully all of you guys will be more organized compositors by the end of this, or you at least be thinking about how to organize your work in such a way that it's clear to everyone. It's really easy to see by just stepping through the layers down in the timeline what each layer does and what each effect does. So when I park on this layer and I click on this paint effect, the first thing I do is I double click and I see if there's anything else inside, and there's not. So then I go, okay, well, what did they do? So I click in here and I do Apple A to select all, and I see two shapes. So each shape I'm going to click on and look at the parameters here, and I see this is a clone. I move it, I say, oh, right, okay. And then I see this is a clone over here, and I move that away and I say, okay, what did they do? Oh yeah, that's just some simple cleanup. So here we go. We've got our clean plate with two different kinds of paint tools going on. In the paint tool, you can have as many shapes as you like, and each one can do something different. This is actually just two clones. I did think, well, maybe it's better if I draw a black shape for that mat. That way we could have two different kinds of paint in one effect. We could have an actual solid shape and a clone, both as part of the same effect. But I think at midnight last night I was just kind of winging it myself a little bit, and forgot that that might be an important teaching element, is that you can have different kinds of paint in one paint effect. All right, so this thing here, what did I call this? I call this my 14 Baker 1 pre-comp element. I think it's done. Now, is it really done? Could this be improved, this clone? Sure, yeah, of course. But I think it's good enough. Yes, sir.
So pre-comp, is that basically just like giving yourself a clean plate?
That's right. One thing that you need to do when you attack a comp for the first time is you got to really think about what elements do I need. And you need the basic plate, you need the base plate, but if that plate needs to get cleanup, then what you really need is a clean plate. So the goal here is to work first on just that one element. We're not going to treat it as a composite shot of multiple elements. We're going to just come up with everything we need to make one element a finished element. So this element here is my clean plate. I've done all the work that I'm ever going to do to this element. And I'm calling it my 14 Baker 1 pre-comp element. So I might even rename it, you know, clean plate. We go clean plate. And I remember what I did to it. But if you're working with multiple people, sometimes you might want to try naming this something else so that it's really clear exactly what you did. But so this element is done. Now let's look at the other element that we're going to be compositing with, which is this photo that I took yesterday of something on my wall at home. So, looks like it's 720 frames long. I only need 48, so I'm going to park somewhere in the middle. The reason I park somewhere in the middle is if it needs to get extended again beyond the 48, I want to be able to roll it. Once it's built, I want to be able to roll backwards in the trim mode and extend it at the head. So it's a handle on my handle, basically. So I'm going to cut that into its own, let's see, OWV comps. There we go. So now what does this thing need? It's going to need a pretty serious perspective shift. Now if I pull up the clean plate here, and down here I cut this in, oops, come on, give me my segment tool. I love the smart tools when they work. Come on, there we go. I'm just going to cut my clean plate in underneath. And I'm going to lay down a really quick 3D warp, right? Or I can start with a picture-in-picture. I go to blend and just grab picture-in-picture and look at this thing and I go, okay. Well, you guys can see that this thing, come on, move for me. Oh, I'm on the wrong layer. This thing doesn't have the right perspective on it. And so this is one of the challenges that, whether it's a comp like this or a completely other kind of comp, this is the kind of challenge that we have to deal with all the time, is marrying two elements that are not ideally suited for each other. The bane of my existence is driving shots. Somebody's inside a car with a green screen and they've shot plates, driving plates for you, and guess what? They suck. They're the worst. They never get it right. I recently, well, geez, nearly almost a year ago, I completed almost a year and a half of work on Pete's Dragon, and we reshot our driving plates on that show 3 or 4 times because Weta just could not get the background plates right. And I hate compositing green screen driving comps myself. I hate them, and I avoid them at all costs until the editor says you gotta do them, or the director says you gotta do them, because they look like shit. And even in the best case scenario with a vendor spending weeks and weeks doing them, they usually don't look very good. So I question the utility of having me do them when we know they're going to look even worse. But there's an argument to doing them early and often on a show where you have to do them eventually. And that is, if you can try to do some of them during production, even if they're rough, even before the editor has assembled the scene, if you can do some test comps with your driving plates and your driving foregrounds, just to make sure and see whether your elements are going to work together, that's going to save you some pain later. And on Pete's Dragon, that's what we did. We started getting the second unit driving plates and comping them, and we kicked them back and said, hey, you got to go back to that location and reshoot these things. So they did that. They were a little better. 6 months later, we turned them over to our in-house vendor, actually, and he couldn't do it. He just couldn't make them work. So we kicked them back to Weta and said, all right, you're doing these shots. And they couldn't make them work either. They had supervised the photography for the interiors and for the background plates, and they could not get these shots to work. I don't know if I'm violating any NDA. I don't care. Weta screwed us and they screwed themselves. So they went out again and reshot. What's that?
Why weren't they working?
Perspective.
Okay.
It's all about perspective. So there's things that alter your perspective. There's lens height, there's angle, and usually the most important one is actually focal length, where you're trying to marry things that are shot on different focal lengths. Everyone knows what a fisheye lens looks like. Yeah. Well, wide-angle lenses that don't distort that much as a fisheye, they still actually distort quite a bit. And telephoto lenses have the opposite effect. They flatten things in space. And when you're compositing, part of, let's say that this is a different kind of comp altogether. Let's say this was a driving comp, and the editor has said, you know what, you got to get around to doing these at some point, because we're going to screen and we can't have any green screen in the whole movie. Okay, well that's how you go through your elements and pick which ones are supposed to go with which, is by looking at things like focal length and lens height off the ground and stuff like that. And ideally, they match. Ideally, you're able to find a background plate that's shot from a similar focal length and a similar lens height and similar distance to the background and everything. But most of us know that's just never true with driving plates. On Pete's Dragon, we actually sent Weta back out 6 months after Principal had wrapped, and they shot additional driving plates. And those didn't work either. So a few months later, we actually did a minor pickup scene or two, and when we picked up additional scenes, Weta went out a fourth time and finally got driving backgrounds that worked. And they did the shots for us, and I have no idea at what cost, because Weta won't even look at a shot for less than five grand or 10 grand, you know. And we had hoped to do them in-house with guys who were getting day rates. So whether they might do 5 wire removals in one day for $600 a day or whatever, I mean, that's dirt cheap. Weta wouldn't do the same wire removal for less than 5 grand a pop. So we had hoped to knock out 100 driving comps with our in-house team. They all ended up going back to Weta, and who knows politically how that all worked out and budgetarily. I don't care. The shots got done, and they got done. They're not the worst, but I wish they were better. But the point is that we had to reshoot those elements 4 times, and they just didn't work. So part of your process here is trying to figure out, you know, when you're doing a temp, figure out what works. Like, look at your elements and really analyze them and try to figure out what works. And part of the reason I shot this thing was to give a tempting look at something that seems like it's the right perspective, but really it's not even close. It's sort of the right angle, but we're gonna have to actually straighten it. So our pre-comp here is gonna be based on straightening this out. So I'm gonna blow away the clean plate under there, because we're just working with a pre-comp of this element. And one thing I usually do is I use the paint tool. I pull up my palette, I go to image, and I go to paint, and I put that on V1 to to create a neutral background. So I'm going to use the paint tool and select a rectangle shape that I want to make. And I'm just going to change that color of the rectangle to something a little softer on the eyes. I'll zoom out like this, and I'll draw the rectangle to cover the entire frame and kick back out. So this is my neutral background. I don't want to be thinking about this background while I'm pre-comping. This is a distraction. I want a completely neutral background, and I do it by using paint on filler. We'll use paint on filler again, and you'll see how it's going to be kind of neat. So let's go into effect editing. Let me go up to my workspace so that you guys get a better view. Workspace, effects editing. And here we go. What am I going to need to do to this thing? I am going to need to 3D warp it. So we go to blend. Not sure why 3D warp lives in blend, but there it is. And I'm going to start to use these corner pin tools right up here. Right here. It's also here, so you can turn it on or off. But I'm going to square this thing up. Because the best way to do a pre-comp is with a perfect element. So we're going to try to get this element as close to perfect as possible. The way I'm going to do it is by corner pinning it. Now, it kind of sucks to work with these corners all the way over here when the corners of your object are actually over here. So you can crop your image. Ooh, and move the corners closer to where you want them to be. Everyone know that? Good. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to move these over, and then I'm going to spend some time trying to square this thing up. And in the end, ooh, we're getting there. It's going to take some time. Here's where the grid tool becomes important. So everyone knows about this little button that throws up a grid, and you have a settings in here, over here, called grid, where you get to tell it how many subdivisions you want. I like to work with a lot, so I've got it set to 20. Say okay. So this grid is going to help me move this thing right to the center of the frame, and in the end, after some work, I'm going to end up with this, where my original image is distorted like crazy, right? But what I've done is I've lined up every corner of this frame on a grid point. And actually, as you are moving things around, if you have the grid activated, the Avid will snap your points to grids, which is great. It won't do it. It's not going to be helpful when you're snapping these points to a grid, but when we cut our map, it's going to be helpful. So I've squared this thing up as best as I can. You confirm that by looking at the grid, and you see this is nicely centered in my shot. Oh, looks like I goofed though last night, and it's actually should be. I've got 2 spaces here, and I've got 1 space here. It's not perfect, but it'll do the job. Left, right, it's centered, which is really critical here. So I'm going to get back out of there. We'll say this is getting there. Next thing we got to do is cut this thing out. So we're going to go into the Animat tool, which is under Key. And Animat is our roto. So here's the thing. Got to remember, you can't see me do this, and the cursor doesn't change. But everyone knows what I'm supposed to do here, right? Hold down what?
Option.
Option, that's right. So I drag the Animat on there, and then I'm going to double click and just make sure, yep, I still have that 3D warp. Now I can see that I still have it, but sometimes you can't see. So, you know, if it's some other kind of effect you've got in there that's not so obvious. So first thing I do, right after I option drag a new effect on top, is I double click and make sure that I see my other effect still nested in there. Okay, so the Animat tool, is just like the paint tool. In fact, they were both added to Media Composer at the same time, back in 1998. They are essentially the exact same tool. Because they both let you draw shapes, move those shapes, animate them, do all kinds of cool stuff. The Animat is just actually a much more limited version of the paint tool.
What did you do?
Say again?
What did you just do?
What did I just do? I'll start from scratch. So I go to my effect editor and I decide I want a rectangle. Rectangle is going to work because I've squared up my picture to a perfect rectangle. Pretty perfect. Maybe not down to the pixel. But I click and drag. There we go. We're getting somewhere. Double click there. Whoops. Now Avid's gotten very finicky with version 8 in terms of how you select things. But I'm going to get this thing close. And then I'm going to replace it with the one that I did last night. Oh, rats.
If you close your color info, that will help you.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. I've been wondering about that. Because lately I've been working with that thing up all the time.
Weren't we talking about that?
No. But Avid recently made some changes to how you select keyframes in this timeline and how you select objects in your working window. And they did all these things that they say made it better, and I don't think it did. And I've been working on Media Composer 8 for, I don't know, a year. I'm still struggling with this stuff. That's just one of the unfortunate things that happens here. Okay, so now look at that. What have I got up there? Yes?
How did you decide to also cut off the shadow on the right side when there's a window on the left side?
We're about to get there.
Okay, sorry.
It's a good question. Yeah, I mean, looking at this thing, when I chose this image, when I shot this image, and tried to make it something that was moderately compatible with my clean plate, I wanted to shoot it slightly from the side so that I could get a little bit of the edge of the frame there. And of course, a byproduct of that is that there's a little shadow on the wall. And I don't know, I thought maybe I should include that shadow in my comp. So I made two different mats for it, and I'm going to show you how. So here we go. We've got our first mat for the frame itself. I'm going to add a point, right, by just double clicking. I'll go over here and click this. Come on, Media Composer. Quit being finicky. Oof. This is the kind of thing that's deadly. Time-consuming. It'll kill you. Oh, and it's killing me right now. So I'm gonna steal. I'm gonna steal this, the one I did last night, and you'll see the end result in just a moment. There it is. Okay. Oh, let me not forget. Looking at this thing. One thing that stands out to me is this bit of hotspot from, this was actually one of my windows in my living room reflecting early morning sunlight on the inner bezel of this frame. And I don't like it, so I'm going to kill it. It's going to make it harder to integrate this into the finished comp. So now that I've squared this thing up, I'm going to use the spot color effect real quick. We're going to Image, the spot color effect, and option drag it on there. And spot color effect is also related to paint and animat. So I'm going to draw a shape on this thing, right? And I'm going to kill that color. So just in that shape, just in that object, I'm going to take the brightness down. Okay. And I'm going to take the saturation down. There we go. So, not the best, but last night I did did it a little bit better, so I'm going to just replace that. And there you go. I've killed that pink entirely. It's just gone. But I haven't done anything else to change the color on that element. So now let's get back to my animat that I was in the process of cutting. And if I click in here and select all, Apple A, you can see that I did make a second shape, as you pointed out. Whoops, I don't want to grab that. I just want to grab that. So I did cut a matte for the shadow on the wall. Whether you want to get into that or not, it's entirely up to you, but part of why I did that was that I wanted to show that, again, similar to the paint tool, within Animat you can have multiple mattes, and they can each be controlled independently. So for this matte that I cut for the frame, there we go, mode is set, the opacity, the mode is key in and the opacity is set to 100 because I want to see it completely. And I also feather the edge just with the minimal amount of feathering for vertical and horizontal. And you'll notice I didn't select anti-alias, and that's because when I was adjusting the shape of this matte, I got it to line up perfectly on these grid points, and those lines on this matte are perfectly straight, so I didn't need any anti-aliasing. Now this second matte that I cut, I feathered a little bit more. You can see I've changed it to 2, still no anti-alias. But I've changed the mode, it's still key in, but I've changed the opacity rather, so it's not fully opaque. I'm setting that to 50 so we can see through it a little bit to our pink wall behind. So the wall is still pink, but there's a shadow on it. So now what I'm going to do is something that very few people know about, which is I'm going to take this matte in Animat, I'm going to select all the shapes, I'm going to go up here to File, Output, Export Matte Picked. And you can see I've already done it. So I'm just going to click that name and replace the one that I already made. Replace. And on my desktop, look what I've got. This is the product of that Animat. This is an alpha channel image that I can re-import back into the Avid and start to do some pretty fun things with.
How do you export that?
You go up to your file, so you've got to be in your Animat, you've got to be in your effect editing mode. So we're in effect editing mode right now, which means you can change your keyframes and all that. And you got to select the shapes that you want, and they can be, you can have multiple shapes with multiple defining characteristics, different parameters, and they can all be exported and merged together as one. So you go up to File menu, and you go Output, and it's right there, Export Matte Pick. And like everything else in the Avid, it's contextual. So if you don't see that in your File menu, it means you're not in the right mode. So you got to kick it into effects editing mode, which you know is live because your effect editor pops up. You got to select your shapes and go to File, Output, Export Matte Picked. And the picked file here, you wouldn't know it opening it in preview, but it has multiple layers in it. It has a clean white background, and it's got these other things in it as an alpha. Or rather, I guess the white is probably the alpha. But we're going to import that now. Now the important thing here, when you go to import it, this becomes our element. This is a new element that we need for our comp. We need our picture frame. So for this comp, I need 3 things. I need the picture, I need the clean plate, and I need a holdout matte. So the holdout matte is a black and white element that's tailored to shape another element. And you're going to use you're going to use it as a matte key effect. So when I bring it in, it's going to automatically become a matte key effect. But if I have time, I'll get to turning something else into a matte key effect in just a few more steps. We'll get there. Okay. So your import parameters, when you go to import one of these things, is you got to go to your options and make sure a few things are selected here. You got to have image size for current format, and you got to have right over here as under alpha channel, you want do not invert. Okay? So we click OK, we select that thing, and we bring it in, and look at what I've got. Oh, let me go into my source record. Workspaces. So when I load this thing up in the source side, that's what it looks like. So I'm gonna come back over here, add a couple of layers, and I'm gonna grab this, my neutral background, and put it back over the top. So I'm starting from scratch. Now the reason I didn't blow this away, I never like to blow anything away. If I'm not happy with the quality of this matte key, I want to preserve this thing here so that I can go back and change it. So I didn't delete it. It's just hiding underneath a new neutral background, right? So we're gonna, oops, I don't want a match frame there. What I want is, I'm gonna double click here. I'm gonna grab my element here, mark into out, inside the nest, and copy it in there. That's an option C. I have my keyboard set to always add the option because I don't understand the value of copying something to my clipboard that I'm not immediately cutting back in somewhere. So in my keyboard settings, I've added option to the C key because option C, when you hit C, it loads something into your clipboard. Where the hell is your clipboard? Well, I want the source monitor to be my clipboard. So option C loads, it copies something into your clipboard and then loads clipboard contents, which is up here. Or it was up here, I don't know. Maybe it's when you've got a double row. Normally I work with a double row up here, but there's something in here. Oh, clipboard contents, there you go. Now it thinks that that's in my clipboard. Who knows? We're gonna go back, so here we go. We're gonna grab it out of here, select that nested layer, hit Option C to load it in there, right? And we're gonna, it's like we're starting from scratch here. We're gonna cut it back in over the top of that pink neutral background. Except now we're gonna load up our matte key element here and also cut that in on one more layer. Well, that doesn't look right. So here's what's inside that matte key. Come on, step in. You've got this image, and well, I guess you can't really see a difference, but what's really here is that there's two images that are polar opposites of each other. If I copy that, well, they're supposed to be. Well, I don't know. This is how it works, folks. So I'll step back out, and here's what I got. I've got my background, I've got my manipulated still image, and I've got this funny matte key here. Well, I double click the matte key, and that fill layer, which is the middle layer, I'm going to replace that layer with my pre-treated. Gosh, this is driving me nuts. Come on. Here, I'm going to make all my tracks a little bit bigger. What it is that the cursor, because the cursor is so big, it's killing me with this nonsense. Okay, so I'm going to double click that and replace this fill layer. So the layer here is the alpha layer, and the layer here is the fill layer. I'm going to replace the fill layer with the image that I want to be the fill. Okay. Now I've got the same effect as my animat, but I've got it in this new thing called a matte key. It's not new, but it was new to me a couple of years ago. It's been around forever though. So here's your map key. It works just like a title graphic where you can move it around and you can change the shape of it, you know, do fun things. Well, guess what else you can do? And we're gonna put it back to 0, oops. Yep. You can promote it to 3D, which means that you can start to do some really interesting things with it. You can change the perspective on it, which is what we're gonna do. We're gonna change the perspective on this. Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry. After you brought it back in,
Uh-huh.
and a few steps afterwards, I got a little lost.
You got a little lost.
Yeah. Do you think you could just, maybe just explain it really quickly?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so we spent some time creating this element, right? This black and white hold-out map. And there's a way that I exported an Animat to create a pict on my desktop. Did you get that?
Yeah, I got all that, and then
Okay.
you brought it back in.
And then I brought it back in.
Recap.
So when I bring it in, I want to go to Input, Import Media, and I want to click Options and make sure if I don't, so for some reason, when you export one of these things out of the Avid, it doesn't export it at the source resolution. So this image, for whatever reason, if I tell it that it's something other than sized correctly, it does something weird to it when it brings it in. So you got to make sure. And I've made this mistake before where I've shaped a map, I've drawn a map in some weird shape, I've exported it, and then because I was recently importing a still or something like that, that was a different size that needed resizing, this thing was set. Now you guys all know that if you're importing 1080p or 720p or 480i footage or whatever, this doesn't matter. You can tell it to resize, it won't resize it. If it's appropriately sized, it will leave it alone. So sometimes you forget to put this back to image size for current format, because when you're importing footage, if the footage is already sized for your format, clicking this resize doesn't do anything to it. And you can make the mistake of thinking that it's the same with these map picked images that you export, but it's not. So when you bring it back in, and I did this last night, as a matter of fact, I forgot, because when I brought in the photo, I clicked resize, but when I brought in my map pick, this thing was still clicked, and it made my map pick not resemble the Animat that I had cut. So image size for current, and then this is the key here, alpha channel, do not invert. I don't pretend to know what this means or why it's confusing, because when a vendor, for example, delivers you something that has an alpha channel baked into it, I think the answer is to invert. So yeah, it's always trial and error. What's up?
Basically, all other program Mac keys, white is opaque, but
Right.
Avid black is opaque.
That's right.
That's
But-
why that option's there.
Right. Yeah, so like if you get a QuickTime from a vendor that has a title layer baked in as an alpha, it's set the other way from how Avid does it. So when you bring it into, and I don't know why it is this way. I mean, it's just typical Avid nonsense. So you click OK, you click on this element, the one that you had exported, and when you bring it in, what you get is it automatically generates this thing up in your bin, which lets you know it's a Mac key. And it says it's with an alpha. And when you load that up in your source record, this is what you've got here. You've got this perfect, this is the Animat that I cut. And you can see it's got a single pixel of blur on the edge of the frame, and then it's got extra blur on that shadow. And you can see the shadow, the shape that I drew is gray because it's 50% opacity, whereas the frame shape that I drew is perfect black because it's 100% opacity. So that's what this thing is. And when I cut this into my sequence, so I went back to a plain neutral background, and then I go like this and I cut this thing in. And what it's doing here right now is inside this thing, on this layer here, is the alpha holdout channel. And on this layer is a fill layer that's exactly the same as the alpha layer. So the fill layer that's being comped into the pink background is exactly the same thing as the holdout layer, which is why it looks like this. So our goal is to replace that fill layer with the image itself, which I'm going to grab by ignoring my animat. I double click to get away from that animat. I mark it into out. I hit Option C to copy that thing. So what we have here is it's got the 3D warp on it. It's got the spot color effect to take away that ugly pink highlight that was so hot on that edge. And I'm just going to cut it back in. And I'm gonna, what it's doing now is you see three things. You've got my background, you've got my, ooh, it looks like my background got moved over, but that's okay.
You're at the end of it.
What's that?
You're at the end of the timeline.
Oh, is that, oh, that's what it is, thank you. I didn't remember moving it. Okay, so I got my background layer, I've got my foreground layer, and then I've got this thing which is currently superimposing itself on my foreground, when what I really want to do is superimpose my foreground on my background. So I'm going to just take this foreground element and move it up inside to replace that fill element there. So right now, this is what I've got. I've got a background, I've got a foreground inside this matte key effect, nested inside there. And the other thing that's nested inside there is a manufactured element that I made. It's my holdout layer. Okay, so that's my holdout. That's the mysterious third element that I need for this temp. So I've got my foreground element, my holdout, nested inside a 3D matte, oh, not 3D yet, but here we go. We're gonna promote this thing to 3D. Boom. And I've got my background. So background and foreground and holdout married together in a matte key. So I'm going to call this is my pre-comp. So this is IMG 4998 pre-comp. We're ready to go. Here's my clean plate sequence. I want to duplicate it because I don't want to work in this. I want to keep this as a if there was a way to lock these sequences, I would. But you can't. I mean, I could lock the tracks, but the way I'm going to lock it is by not working in it. I'm going to duplicate it, and we're going to call it comp. So here's my comp. We're ready to go. We're going to turn off that grid. Ugly. Now I'm going to load up. So my comp starts with duplicating my clean plate pre-comp. And then I take my image pre-comp and I load it up there. And, well, I don't need this pink background anymore. All I need is this thing. So I'm going to do the patch that way. V5. I'll leave myself an extra layer in there. Insufficient source, what? Come on. There we go. Okay. Now, if it's not apparent, the reason I have squared this thing up and created this whole matte key nonsense is because now that this is a 3D matte key, I can go to crop it, and I'm going to crop it right to the edge there. Boom. Like this. And now when I go to corner pin this thing, I'm working with something that the Avid understands. I'm working with corners on corners. Because if I was going to take this thing, let's see. Let me pull this out. This thing doesn't help me. If I cut this thing into this shot, I'm not going to be able to manipulate this the way I want to, because there's no way to get these corners, which I can move to wherever I want, in the shot. There's no way to get them to line up with the corners of the element. So this is careful planning. So we're going to decide where this thing wants to go behind him, you know, more or less, right? And we'll take some time using corner pin to adjust the perspective, right? Whoops, that ain't right. Now, luckily, this is a great piece of footage Richard gave me. It has vanishing lines in it. These lines on the wall are perfect vanishing lines to line things up with. So I know that if I get the bottom edge of my frame so that it's lined up exactly with one of those cinder blocks, that's more or less correct. And if I get the sides, whoops, lined up with one of these lines, it's going to be correct. So this is what I'm going to do. I don't want to make you guys sit through all that, because that does take time. I'm just going to take my existing unsupported res. Oh, brother. Here's where we're going to end up in trouble. Let's see. I know what I can do. I'm going to take the finished comp. That unsupported res thing is a real pain.
Are you double clicking it or option clicking it?
I am just trying to load it up, man. I'm just trying to load up a sequence, and it's giving me pain. So, oof. All right, here's what I'm going to do. This is going to be, show you a little trick. I need to steal my corner pin, my crop. This is the old one that I did last night that for whatever reason will not load tonight. I mean today, this morning, my goodness. I slept 3 hours last night, so a little bit.
Welcome to my world.
Yep. Okay. That's right. Now, actually, I was gonna say that, ooh, man, come on. This thing itself, you might want to give a very specific name and then import it.
How did you photograph it in the Avid? Option 4? What?
Shift Apple 4.
Oh, like a normal.
Yep, it's just, so the screenshot tool works. Oof, man. So I'm going to open that up and go back to this thing. And here we go. Where's my Mac key? Okay, so we're nesting inside. And I'm just going to quick punch these numbers in. Yeah. I've got to promote it to 3D so that I have all those numbers available to me. And 663, minus 735, minus 298, 320, scaling 60, position 70, 265, and is that right?
Highlight color.
Say again?
Highlight color.
Highlight.
Yeah, the highlight color you need to change. Yeah.
Say again?
You need to change the highlight color.
I'm sorry. Oh, the corner pins. Thank you. Oh, rats! Look at that. Shoot. Oh no! Well, guess what? I have it saved from last night, so I'm gonna. Let's see. Desktop. VFX editing. Source files. Where do we go? User generated. There we go. Open. That's got my corner pin parameters. Thank you so much. I was going to lose my mind. Minus 491, 624, 607, 647, 5, so 9 minus 560 minus 478 and minus 126. Okay, that's where it needs to be. Thank you for all of you who helped with this.
This
Okay.
was actually very informative.
This
how
is.
to fix, how to fix an error. This is actually very.
Oh, good. Well, I'm sorry if I'm moving too fast.
No,
but
this was actually a good thing to happen because
it is. It's a
happens on
great
the
thing. All right. So here we go. This is the This is the product of some time spent last night fiddling with this tool here. This corner pin here, and moving what I did was I moved my crop like this until I was lined up with the corners on the frame, and then I used this to pin those to just move those corners around like that until I felt I was good. And then here's another trick actually. If I uncrop it, now I've got my corners all the way back here, and I can see, oh, you know what? I goofed on the perspective a little bit. There's a little bit, this line here, the bottom of the frame, is not parallel perfectly with that seam, the mortar seam in those blocks. So once I uncrop, it actually is to my advantage to be able to use the real corners of the image all the way out here, because I have more that I can do there. Okay. All right. Well, so here we go. We've got, I'm just going to quick do something. Where do we go? Okay, very good. It's starting to get there, right? So this is my temp. Time to talk about integrating, because this is put where I want it to be. Now, the great thing about the Mat key is that if this were a moving plate, I could pull up my tracking tool and track it to something. I mean, I guess, why don't I do that? Right? Now, I'm not going to demo it for you, but does everyone know the trick that when you're tracking, if you go to your desktop and open a QuickTime movie in QuickTime Player, it will speed up the track in the Avid?
What?
Because you're turning off the engine.
I don't know, I have no
You're
idea,
turning
but
off- you're turning
I
off the
discovered that
engine.
in 2008 when I was working on an old adrenaline system. Actually, it was a software only, MC285, and I had these really, really gnarly tracks that would take a minute, going one frame at a time, like dunk, dunk, and 300 frame shot or something. So I'd get bored, and I'd click out of the Avid, and I noticed, oh, it'll keep tracking while I've clicked out of the Avid. So then I said, oh, let me open this, I had ripped a DVD of Alien or something like that to watch in my spare time during renders. So I double clicked that QuickTime, and the instant I opened that QuickTime, the tracking, it flew through it. It's an amazing thing. I have no idea. You've got a
You
theory.
turn on the engine.
Yeah, I don't know.
You turn in the QuickTime engine, and that's why it goes faster.
Maybe so. But there's a trick. It's a bug, but it's a feature, if you ask me. So let's go to this keyframe. We're just going to activate tracking so that you can see how it would work. Position tracking. So now you can see that this thing is tracked to the dude's mustache, right? So we'll turn that off because our plate is a nice lock off. Now, in generating your clean plate, if this wasn't a lock off, here's something you might want to do. You might want to stabilize the plate, right? And then when you finish your comp, you can go and copy that tracking that you did on the stabilization and apply it to your finished comp to put that organic movement back in. Anyone done that trick? A couple of them maybe. It's a really nice trick. What's up?
Do you find that tracking works well on Avid?
It depends. There are certain kinds of tracking that it's great at, and I've spent 8 years trying to get really good at those at that.
Right.
And there's certain kind of tracking that it just can't do. Real quick, I'm a firm believer in keeping the work in the Avid. And Richard, if he has any time when I'm done, is going to talk about why and some of the goals for keeping it all under one roof. I had all kinds of points I wanted to make about that, but I just go on and on and on. And we didn't get there. And I had to start doing this temp. But I'm a very firm believer in doing all your work in the Avid. Especially when it's collaborative, when there could be another assistant editor who needs to change your comp, or when there's a visual, if you're an assistant editor and then you get a VFX editor hired downstream who their job is just, you've already temped the whole movie, but their job is to turn everything over. You don't want them having to come to you every 5 minutes and say, this After Effects thing that you did, what are the pieces? Where do I find them? That's bullshit. You want them to be able to tear it apart in the Avid where it belongs. And the reason why, and I think that there's so many good reasons for keeping in the Avid that to me it feels like pressure to learn how to use the Avid to do quality work, rather than go to something like After Effects, where the tracking is much better. But what I tell myself is that if I can't do it in the Avid, you shouldn't be paying me to do it at all. So in short, the philosophical thing there is that our union does say that we're supposed to be able to work as, sound editors, and within reason, we should be able to do music editing and visual effects temping, all this stuff. I think, even as a guy who hasn't gotten credit as an assistant editor for years, I get credit as a visual effects editor. I think if I cannot do it in the Avid, you don't want to be paying me to do it at all.
Just a sidebar, the Mocha Tracker BCC, which is Avid plugin, works really good.
Yeah, so that I don't know how to use it, and I recently was in a pinch on my movie when we were about to screen for the studio, and somebody had used Boris, the guy I replaced, had used Boris to roto out an animal, a moving animal, and put him up in a tree. It was a squirrel. And he used Boris to roto and all this other stuff, and but the roto was really, really bad, like real bad. And I had to clean it up ahead of showing the studio. So I had two choices. I could either go to his Boris, Mocha, whatever, and grind through trying to figure out how to use it, or I could start from scratch. It was better for me to start from scratch. It's actually just 2 days, so I'm previewing my movie today, and 2 days ago we had a colorist, he was working on a separate system that did not have Boris installed. So even though he knows how to use Boris, his system didn't have Boris, which meant that he had to call me from time to time and say, hey, I'm closing this reel, I've marked a region into out, I need you to render it for me. Because on my system, it's kicking up some weird text over the screen that says, activate Boris license, blah, blah, blah. That can't be in the movie. So at some other point, maybe we'll talk more about why I personally try to avoid Boris as much as possible. I'll use it for things like filters, effects, particle, avoid it at all costs, because other people don't know how to use it. I sort of only kind of know how to use it. And I know that Mocha Tracker is great. I know that it does do what's called planar tracking, which is one thing the Avid doesn't do. But I just don't think, I've worked on some pretty big things, and maybe part of the luck of that is that the things that I'm working on are big enough that I can say, I don't do that. Get the compositor, get the guy in the next room to do that. And when you're working on a small thing and you don't have compositors on your crew, you can't say that. But what you can say is, dude, I'm not a VFX editor. In fact, a roto on something that I don't know how to do. So, managing your time and resources and skill set is personally, I've never needed it, and I think there are compelling enough reasons to keep it in the Avid and avoid Boris, avoid After Effects, all that other stuff, that it's put the pressure on me actually to get better at doing things in the Avid than I might have otherwise gotten. So I know how to use After Effects. I just don't, because I prefer to keep it in the Avid, believe it or not. All right, I don't know what I've got here. Dang it. Okay, position.
Turn position back on, but turn position tracking.
That's it. Thank you so much. Who was that?
That was me over here.
Wonderful. You're a VFX editor, aren't you?
Yeah, a little bit.
All right, great. Okay, so there it is. Looks great, right? I mean, we can show that to somebody. Actually, what we can do and what we should do at this stage is show it for position and sizing and stuff like that. So this is the stage where I would take it to my editor and say, is this what you had in mind? And he's going to say, no, it needs to be bigger, it needs to be smaller. Behind the picture. So we're going to have to roto him back in front of it. And then second of all, the picture itself doesn't really sit in there, does it? It looks kind of like a bad CG. You know, when you see a big movie and you've got CG people in there or CG critters that just they don't seem like they match the exposure. There's a lot of things that go into matching CG to real photography. If the more time you spend with this stuff, the more you start to grasp what those things are. Contrast, black levels, exposure, white balance, all that. Within itself, all the hairs are perfectly rendered and lit and everything, and it's amazing. It just doesn't match the background at all. So here we've got two things that we need to do to integrate. We've got to roto him, and we've got to treat that picture somehow. And the way I've built this thing, it's that treating the picture that's going to be really, really easy because of this map key. So first things first, everyone knows how to use the animat, or are there people who do not know how to use it? You don't? Are you guys coming tomorrow?
Yeah.
Well, here's what I want to do, right? I want to grab this guy and turn him into the foreground, but only part of him, just his shoulder. So I'm going to mark that clip into out. I'm going to Option C to load it up. So I've loaded up the clean plate. You see how it says up here 14 Baker 1 comp sub. I didn't load the original footage. I loaded the clean plate right out of the sequence that I'm in. And I'm cutting it back in like that. So now I've got my background, my midground, and my foreground. So just his shoulder is going to be the effect palette, and I go to film, and I grab the 16:9 mask, and I put it there. And it just so happens that when you're working in the scope ratio, the mask, which was originally intended to mask 4:3 footage to 16:9, will map your 16:9 footage back down to scope. So just as a matter of cleanup, I'm putting that on filler. I did that on an empty layer. So I made myself an empty layer, a little empty layer here, and I'm just going to put the map in there on filler, and voila. Okay, so here, how do we make this guy our foreground? Well, we're going to Option drag Animat from over here in key. So we park on that, we Option drag Animat and put it on there, and then we click on Animat, and we start to draw a shape. Now, I am a big fan of using curves. There are a lot of people who, when they draw their shape, they start drawing these, they think they need to catch, oh, come on. I need to go into my workspace and effects editing so that I can see what I'm doing here. Once you've mastered the basic concept of Animat and you've drawn simple shapes and stuff like that, then you want to move on. I would say bypass the poly tool and go straight to the curves tool. And what you do in a situation like this is, I'm going to turn this off for a moment. There are strategies for how to draw your shape and where to start that I want to just take a minute to talk about, which is to find. Now, here's the thing: in Animat, just as in Paint or in Spot Color or any of these shape drawing effects tools, you can draw multiple shapes and give them multiple effects with different parameters, different levels of transparency, as you saw when I did that shadow there. So in this situation, it's just one shape I'm drawing, and it's on his shoulder, and that's the only part of him that I want to put back in front of the photo. So I just drew a loose shape, right, and I started in the middle of the shot. So when I first put this animat on, I scrubbed around, and I found what I thought was a good starting point. Now, if you have to do a really tricky one where you've got, you know, people waving their hands and all kinds of other stuff, that's a really big deal. And tomorrow, anyone who comes, I have footage that we can use to do much harder rotoscoping. But rotoscoping takes a long time. It's everyone's least favorite part of the gig. And that's also why last night I didn't do, you know, a super awesome job rotoing this guy. What is going on here? But you can see that as you move the shape, you know, you can see what's happening here. This shape is getting near the edge there of his shoulder. And so my argument is I like to use as few points as possible. So I draw a shape organically with the curve tool, you know, like this. And then I start by eliminating points.
How do you do that?
You click on them. Oh gosh. You know what I need to do? I know what I need to do. I gotta get out and render all these layers below. That's an important thing that I should have mentioned. You want to render as you go. Since we're stacking vertically, we want to render things vertically. You know, that way the real-time demands that you're placing on the system never get too out of hand. So,
Close the color info.
huh?
Close the color info.
Thank you. Goodness, Bronwyn, you are a champion. Wonderful. I gotta remember that. That's amazing. So, you know,
It's the simple things.
it is. It's been killing me lately because I only just recently started working with that color window up all the time, and it's making it impossible to. Yeah. So I parked right in the middle of the shot, and I'm actually going to work forward through the shot and then backward through the shot as I place my keyframe. So my first keyframe, I drew this shape, and then, you know, you double click on it. You can select individual points, and they're automatically in Bezier mode since I was drawing a curve. So I can start tweaking the curves, but I can also start eliminating points that I think are not necessary. And once I've got the shape more or less there, then I decide how much to soften the edge of it, you know, and which direction I want it to soften in. So under feathering, and because it's a curved shape, we definitely want anti-aliasing on. Under feathering, these sliders set how blurry that edge of my shape is so that it's not a perfect cut, it's blurry. And then bias sets which direction the blur heads. So bias this way means it's blurring away from my shape, and bias that way means it's blurring, it's eating into my shape. So these are things that you can fiddle with a lot. I don't recall, what did I have it last night?
422.
422, thank you, somebody's paying attention. Paying more attention than I am. So we go to the head of the shot, and that's where our shape is going to be in the same place as it was when we drew it in the middle of the shot. So we go to the head, we add a keyframe using this button or using the button on your keyboard, and you start modifying that shape. And then you go to the end, and you start modifying the shape. And then you work your way in from the ends to the middle, or out from the middle to the ends. And you find as few keyframes as necessary, people. You want to not spend your life keyframing roto shapes. Though tomorrow, if you want to, I've got a gnarly one for you. It's that animal up in the tree. It's a squirrel. It's very crummy and low quality footage, stolen off of Vimeo, which, you know, that's sometimes what we have to do. And
Green screen animals.
Say again?
Is it green screen animals?
Right, greenscreenanimals.com. All right, so Roto, to recap, what we've done is we've got our background. Sorry, here's our background, clean plate. Here's our foreground, which has now become our midground because we're putting his shoulder in the true foreground by comping him back in, but only comping this portion of him using rotoscoping on his shoulder. So it's done, right? No. What's up?
Is there a way to combine the forces of Animat with tracking so that you can
There
just
is.
draw
That's-
the shape of his shoulder, track it, and then you don't have to do all the keyframes?
I'm gonna get there in about 5 or 10 minutes, I hope. All right, that's the thing that nobody really. So Bronwyn has figured it out. I figured it out a couple of years ago myself, and most of us who do temp comps in the Avid do not know how to do this, and it is fantastically painful. As I mentioned a long time ago, if you do a ton of rotoscoping and you later have to make changes in scale or location of your rotoscoped object, well, most of us think we have to start from scratch. So if I were rotoscoping, let's say I wanted to just put a little squirrel running along his desk, and I had to rotoscope the squirrel, and then somebody said, oh, dude, you made the squirrel too big, or it should be running this direction. You gotta flop the squirrel and run in that direction. Most people think that you've gotta start your animat from scratch. And if you want to 3D warp him, or track him, or anything like that, you think you got to do all that and then animate him. But the pre-comp concept is you take that squirrel, and before you do any compositing, you roto him, and then we're going to use that roto on the squirrel to generate a black and white holdout channel. And once we have that extra element, that holdout, which is our rotoscoping turned black and white, and I'm going to do it on this shot with this really simple shape, and you'll see how that works. You turn your shape black and white, it becomes a holdout layer, a holdout element, and then you put a matte key effect, this one right here, which everyone wonders, what does that thing do? You know, if you've done a lot of Avid temping and you use the Spectrum matte, you use the Luma key, the Animat, the RGB key, if you're like me, you went years without knowing what that matte key is for.
That's what I'm doing.
So we're going to do that on this shot. Last thing I want to do is I want to do something called taking the curse off, or buzzing that element that we've put in there. So that element sticks out like a sore thumb. It looks like bad CG. So the way I've built this thing in my timeline, boom, 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 boom. I've got here's the layer that I want to affect, right? I want to make that midground layer look right. Now here's the thing. You open it up a little bit like this, and everyone remembers this is the layer where this is the image that we want to affect. Right here on this layer, the JPEG, 4998 JPEG. It's already got that spot color on it, right? And that thing was taking that awful pink highlight off of there. Well, we're gonna add a simple color effect, which I've already done over here. But what you can do, you can either use color correction or color effect. In this case, I'm just using color effect. It's simpler. And I'm going to option drag it on top of that thing and go to work. So this is where we add the final touch. This is where you put your color effect so that you're not changing the color of the whole shot. You're just changing the color of that layer of the shot. You put it inside that 3D matte key, right? Now, one thing that I didn't say yet, but I do want to talk about, is that as you're doing all this work, you should be parking on your finished work for each effect and grabbing that icon up here and dragging it into a bin and renaming it. So this paint effect, this thing that was my clone tool to make a clean plate, I'm going to drag it into the bin and I'm going to name it what it is. And that's what I've got down here somewhere. I've got the, where is it? Wall clone and matte paint. Step 5, wall clone and matte paint. So some people don't realize you can do that, but you can take a finished effect and steal it like this into a bin as a preset for other footage, or for the same footage potentially. And it's a great way to save your work and make sure you don't lose something that was working. So you can call this V1, paint effect for, for wall clone, V1. That way, when somebody says, oh, change, that wall clone doesn't look good, and then you go to your sequence here, and you think, okay, all I'll do is in this comp sequence, I'm going to change the paint down here, and then you find that you've messed it up. You've made it worse. Now you've got to go back to the way it was. Well, the good news is you've stolen that effect here, and it's easy to just reapply it and go back to the way it was. Okay, so this color effect that I put on there, this is my final integration pass. And what I'm going to do, this is why I have that color tool. But I'm going to change my view. Bronwyn, thank you so much. My goodness. This is like my favorite thing, is that I just learned from Bronwyn that all my pain from the last few months is because of this one dumb thing. When I have my effect editing workspace, I have included this in my saved effect editing workspace, and this has been the source of all my pain. So I'm going to kill that. I'm going to delete it and then resave my effect editing workspace. Oop, not minimize. Close. Go to my Windows workspaces. Save current. Now when I go to source record, and then back to workspaces, effects editing, it's gone. So I have to call it up. All right, so this is a color picker, or really it's just it's like a window into your footage. Here's what I notice. I noticed that this is a piece of linen, and some familiarity with what things are in real life will help you here. So I know that this is a piece of linen, and I know that this is a piece of cotton poly blend. This is a piece of paper. And when I have this color tool up, I notice that when I park over these things, it's telling me their R, G, and B values. And these are about the brightest things in the shot. Maybe that window back there, that's pretty bright, but even that thing, it's registering at 208. And this is around 170, 140, 130. What's this thing? Holy shit. That is really bright. So I'm going to just change my color parameters. I'm not going to use the color correction. I'm just going to change these parameters here. And by changing the amount of blue or white, blue or green or red, I'm changing the white point, the reference point for what white. I know this is white. I know it is. So right now, it's telling me 235, 232, 232. It's not perfectly white, but nothing in the shot is perfectly white. So if I want it to look more like this paper, then I'm going to look at those numbers and say 169, 166, 169. So it's just 3 points less green. Say again?
What are you looking, the video or the LUT?
Oh, there is no LUT on this.
No, but
I understand. I'm looking at the left side, where it says video, not where it says video LUT. I'm just looking at the left side. Now, there's no LUT on this footage. So here we go. This is telling me that there's a touch less green than there is red and blue. So if I want this thing to look like this and look real in this scene, I'm gonna remember those numbers and fiddle with this stuff until I get there, right? So, where I landed last night, midnight, was right there. Now I've also played with the brightness and contrast here, okay? But already that's looking considerably better than that. It's not perfect, but it's getting there. Now you might also notice that this black is no longer really deep black, is it? That's because I know it's a reflective surface, and I don't want it to be super black. I want it to resemble more closely some of these other black plastic surfaces down here. You know, it's not supposed to, this cloth back chair, that's absorbing light. This thing's gonna reflect light, so the numbers are gonna be higher. It's gonna be brighter than this. See how these are all about 50? These are about 70. So I fiddled with brightness and contrast, and I fiddled with the amount of color gain until I felt that this thing was balanced. And you know, it's a matter of taste and choice. Like, whoa, didn't mean to do that much. Now, does everyone know that if you hold down Shift when you're doing these sliders, they move much slower. So if you want to do very fine adjustments, you hold down Shift when you're moving these sliders. So you could say that this thing naturally should have a white balance closer to his shirt, which is on the red side, or closer to this, which is on the red and blue minus green side. Or you could make it try to look like this. It's up to you. But this is sort of the final pass. That's it. And the last thing that I want to do is, to me, it looks a little sharp. It looks maybe just a little too sharp in there. And so I'm gonna uncollapse that thing.
I'll put some drop shadow too.
What's that?
I will put some drop shadow.
Put some drop shadow? Well, that's what that shadow on the edge was supposed to be. You can paint in drop shadow using paint shapes if you wanted to. And you know, if I felt that this needed some more shadow, I would add a track probably. And well, I guess I don't know. Matter of fact, I would probably go back to my pre-comp of this and change the pre-comp. Adding that kind of treatment is not something that I like to stack up on top of the whole shot. But one thing that I did do is, in this 3D matte key, I just did last night, I thought, what if I knock it slightly soft? So one thing that real compositors do is, you know, they zoom way in on their work and they compare, whoops, a little too much. All right, now this is natural photography, and you can see the natural anti-aliasing that's happening on this edge, right? There's not a hard edge, high contrast between black pixels and white pixels there. That is a blurry mix of pixels. When I look at this thing, look at these, there's a little bit in there, but you look at this sort of stair-step effect that's on that thing, and it looks a little sharp. And if you compare it to anything nearby, these things that are nearby don't have any of that sharpness, that ugly stair-stepping. So I thought, okay, I'm going to use that matte key to defocus it a little bit. And, you know, I thought, oh, there we go. That's without the defocus. You can see that this here is much sharper than any there's plenty of fine detail in here. If I were to pump the contrast on this shot, on the overall shot, you would start to see all kinds of details pop out of this wall that are barely visible here as texture. But there's so much more ugly, sharp detail there. That's why I wanted to, that's how it really looked. So I wanted to soften that up just a little bit. And how much you do, it's a matter of taste. It's up to you. Maybe you don't do it at all. But that was sort of, to me, the last thing that I wanted to do to get this in there. And, oh, here, we accidentally added a keyframe. Copy, paste, and blow that away. And to me, it's passable. You know, the roto on the shoulder could use some refining, but the good news is that's the top layer. So when I go to refine that, if somebody says to me, you got to fix the roto on his shoulder, nothing else has to change in that shot. The way I've built it, the way I've organized it, all I have to do is go back in and touch that top layer roto and spend half an hour perfectly refining that roto edge. So here it is. Now, how do you get this into your movie? Where was our sequence? It's was this it? Scene 14. So I'm going to go back over to source and record. Windows, workspaces, source record. And I'll load up the comp again. And I'm going to rename this thing pre-mix down. V1. This is important. You want to, whether it's you or somebody else that goes back later and makes changes or does the turnover to the vendor, you got to know how to find your stuff. So I'm naming this thing pre-mix down version 1. I'm going to do a, where is it? Timeline, mix down, video. We're going to punch that out, and there's my comp. I'll give that a nice color. I'm a big fan of using colors. I'll just take this, oops, take this out of there. Now here's the key. You want your mix down to have the exact same name as the sequence that it was mixed down from. All the other rules about what you do with your layers of video, it depends on the editor. Some editors, I've seen timelines that have 20 video tracks. I've never worked like that. The most I ever had was on Prometheus, and that was like 12. But I like to work with like 6, 7, 8, you know, but I've worked with editors who freak out about more than 3 video layers. So every show has really different rules and parameters. So I'm going to take that mix down and just cut it in like this. And now this is the mixed down sequence that I created here. So in here, boom, 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 collapse. There it is. Now this thing I can cut in. Whoops. There we go. Like that. No, wrong trim. -8. Oh. All right, here we go. So this is your shot. You've got something that no one can screw up. So there's no temp effects in there. There's no animats or anything else for anyone else to screw up when they make a trim or move this thing. But if this bin ever gets lost or if somebody can't find it, which, hey, the way I work, you can find it because you can park on this thing, match frame out, you got comp mix down, you go find bin, there it is, and you sort by name, and hey, there's the sequence that's got all the pieces for that mix down. There's no way to get lost there. I work with people who don't do this, and it's painful. It's really, really painful trying to tear their work apart. Now, if their work was in After Effects, it would be even harder because there'd be nothing in the Avid for me to find. So this way, if this...
In your submaster, do you have your comp?
Yep, that's what's in there. Those are all the comp layers inside the mixdown. Yep. So again, and it's really easy for me, if I needed to just grab those layers, mark them, option copy. How many layers was that? Oh, auto patching. Jeez. Jeez Louise. There they are. So, tearing this thing apart, turning it over, making changes, easiest thing in the world. Now, I'm ruining things for you. I'm sorry, Richard. But I want to talk about those changes. And having to re-roto, or avoid re-roto because of the way we built this thing. Let's say somebody says to you after you've done all this work, I want to flop the shot. And let's say that tomorrow you're in here and you want to use a much harder element like this, where flopping this would fuck it up, wouldn't it? Pardon my French. If you were to flop this thing, that poster, all your work would be lost. You'd have to start from scratch if you flop the plate, because this thing, you can't flop that. So I want to talk about how I did this. Where is it? Where's my comps? My comps, my comps. Here we go. All right. There's your flop. Oops. Oh, come on. So, what am I looking at? Where's my,
You're looking at the source.
oh, no, something else is in there. Something else, wait a minute. Did I? Oh, devil. Devil of all devils. It didn't, or maybe I misnamed it? No. It didn't save when I sent the bin over Dropbox. I hadn't done the work yet. Wow. Okay. So this is how we're going to do it. I'm going to try to nail it really quick. Where's my comp? Here we go. Premix down. So somebody comes back to you later and says, we need the whole thing flopped. Well, and they give you, they blow away your work in the timeline, and you're back to square one with the dailies with a flop on it. Well, what do you do then? If you're back to square one with the dailies with a flop on it. Now, hang on. Doop. So they've blown away all your work. They got rid of that mix down that you had in there, and it's back to the dailies on V1, except now they've put a flop on them, which is under image, flop. So now you can't just put this thing there, can you? It's in the same place as it was there. So you take your work. I mean, I'm going to advocate that, yes, you do put it there. So, here, let me just subsequence that out. And so we've got our flop. Now, this is why you want to have pulled your effects off, right? So you go back to this thing and you say wall, clone, and matte paint. You just drop it on top of the flop. Oh, no, sorry. You double click inside the flop. And boom, that's done. You've got your clean plate flop now.
So you open up the flop and dump the
That's right.
the effect.
Yeah, exactly. So you go down a layer until you're back to where you were here. You step inside the flop and you've got your original plate, don't you?
So the flop is also a purse?
I'm saying, you know, they've given you the thing and they've flopped it, or they've asked you to flop it. The way to do it is, if you want to flop this shot, you've got to start from your clean plate. So that way you don't have to redo this clone layer. You don't have to redo it. You put it on the plate and then you flop.
So if you
flop
put the
them
flop
together.
in the entire collapse,
Exactly.
it's not
You're
gonna
flopping
work.
them together. Yeah. So now let's go to my original comp, and we'll say everything in here is done. So we've got this layer done and that layer done. I don't want to have to redo this stuff. So I'm going to cut it in. Oh boy. All right, what do we do here? Well, I'm going to take that thing and I'm going to go to rotation, click Y, do that. And I'm going to go to XY position and do -71. All of a sudden it's in the right place. But the image contained within is flopped. And his shoulder is back in front of it. And I don't want to have to re-roto his shoulder. So I'm going to move really quickly here. Uh-oh, zipping around there. Let's go. Ah, I added a keyframe by accident. Blow that thing away. All right, so that's all done. The color's in there, all that stuff's in there, all that integration stuff. The only problem now is the layers on top, that foreground layer. And the image inside the frame, which will have to get flopped. But that's gonna be really easy too. And I chose an image where you can't really tell that that image is flopped because you can't see the text along the bottom that says Bill Murray's head and the artist's name and everything. But tomorrow, anyone who comes in and wants a challenge can start with this thing. And then you'll see how bad this would be if that poster was now backwards. And we'll have the solution. So let's build up a couple of layers here, a couple of extra layers. Working layers in there. So, because right here we've got everything done and looking great. Now we have to take this roto that we did, and we don't want to have to redo it. And this will hold true for any kind of crazy ass animated roto you've ever done in your life. You never have to redo it again. And this is how. I'm going to take that original paint that I have, which is neutral, and I'm making a new background right in there. I'm going to change that thing to grab my big object that was covering the whole shot, right? And I'm going to go into color, kill saturation, and it's white. Now I'm going to just go up here and steal it. Everyone see this? I'm dragging it down there. And I'm gonna, oh, I don't want a monitor up there. I want to have a black layer. Kill Luma. And it's black. I'm making a new holdout matte from the Animat that I did. So you guys saw me use Animat on the picture frame and export it and make a import, and now I got this black and white holdout thing and matte key. Now I'm going to make a holdout layer another way. So I've got white background, black foreground, and this is my original Animat for that guy's shoulder. I'm going to steal that into a bin, right? Steal that. And I'm going to then option drag it onto my black foreground. And get rid of that thing, and there you go. There's your holdout. That is the work that I did on his shoulder represented as a black and white layer, a holdout layer. So what do I do with that thing? Well, I'm going to go back to the clean plate of him that's not flopped, because that's the element that matches my holdout.
I'm sorry. How did you turn it into a holdout map?
I used black and white paint on film and just put the, so here we go. Let's look at it really carefully. What is this? This is the animat that I did on his shoulder, and I stole it. If I step inside there, you're going to see the simplest thing in the world. You're going to see a layer of black. Where's my white? Oh, there it is. I got to put that inside there too. So here's my white layer. I'm going to nest that up inside there. Step into this thing. So I've got a layer of white, a layer of black. That's just a paint effect on fill. There's no footage. And I've got the animat on the black. So that's my holdout layer right there. I'm going to render it, and actually this is not the best time to render it. I got to go in here, and what does that holdout layer match? It matches this original clean plate, this thing, not the flopped one. Whoops. So I'm going to cut that in there. So here's what we've got. We've got our clean plate flopped, we've got our image flopped, we've got that little protection layer. Now here's the clean plate with no flop and a holdout layer. I'm going to render both of these. Now this is an effect that you can do with much crazier footage, like a squirrel running along a branch. You can spend hours rotoing that squirrel off the branch and into a different shot, running along the top of a fence perhaps. And then somebody tells you he's too big. And you have to redo those hours of roto. No, you do not. This is how you avoid that. You make this thing that matches your original element, your squirrel element, say, with lots of complicated roto, 1,000 little points and curves. So we've got foreground layer, foreground holdout layer. We pull up our effect palette, which is all the way over here for some reason. Oh, because I'm not in the effect workspace. And I'm going to go to key and find that matte key. This is how I discovered it. I discovered the export from Animat to matte picked. And then I discovered that when I imported that, it made something called matte key. That rang a bell for me, and I said, matte key, isn't that the thing that's always been in here that I don't know what the hell it does? And I read the instructions in Avid, and they said, use the matte key effect when you have a black and white alpha layer and footage. I said, well, where the hell would I get a black and white alpha layer? And I started to think about that. So I came up with this way of making your black and white alpha layer. Shoulder unflopped, superimposed. And just go to the matte key, promote it to 3D, and rotation, 180, and there you have it. No redoing your roto, it's done.
What is that ghosting?
Say again?
What is that ghosting?
The ghosting?
No, there's a piece of stuff in there. It's a shirt.
Are you talking about this right here?
Yeah.
That's a wrinkle in his shirt, yeah. So when I was rotoing him, I was trying to decide whether I wanted to just actually cut that out completely. That's one thing that's great about roto. People think that the more strange and organic and uneven a surface is or a shape is, the harder it is to roto. Nothing could be further from the truth, because your eye is so used to looking at uneven and strange, unpredictable shapes that when you roto this guy, you could just cut that thing right off. You don't have to trace around it and change it on every frame to perfectly trace around the wrinkles of his shirt.
Unless it's fingers.
What's that?
Unless it's fingers.
Unless it's fingers. Right. And I chose not to do that here. But tomorrow, the thing is, we have footage of this guy reaching out across his desk. So if anyone wants to try it tomorrow, they can. But I didn't want to do it. Not last night at midnight. Yeah, that thing's bumping because I just didn't do a great job.
Oh, okay.
I didn't actually see how you reversed it. Can you just do it on the screen?
Yep. Okay, so what we have here is we've got our flopped background, flopped midground, unflopped foreground, and unflopped holdout layer. So we go up to the palette and we select the matte key because we want to make in the Avid the same thing that we got when we imported sorry, this thing. Workspaces, source, oh, come on. Last night I was fiddling around and I mapped my workspaces to keys on my keyboard and it wasn't sticking. Somebody's been telling me that I need to rebuild my settings, which I'm really dreading.
You always say to rebuild your settings.
Huh?
You always say to
I
rebuild.
hate that. So here we go. This is the thing that we got when we exported the matte picked from Animat and re-imported it. And what is it called? A matte key. So we want to make our own matte key on this footage here, don't we? And there just so happens to be something in the effect palette called matte key. So we option drag it onto that shape. And so here's the unflopped clean plate. Here's the black and white shape with a matte key on it. And we are superimposing just like we want to. So we go to edit the matte key. Notice everything under there is still rendered. I'm just working on the top layer here. If we go to the matte key, I don't see rotation in there. I can click 3D and go to rotation. I'm rotating around the vertical axis, which is Y, 180 degrees, and it's done. If you want to see what that looks like, if you don't just type the number in, that's what I'm doing. You see that? So the roto is done. I'm never going to roto this guy again unless my editor is really finicky. And I worked with a couple of those. But now the last problem, which would be much more apparent if you try this with this. Now this has other challenges inherent to the photography, which is why I shot this photography this way. There's other really gnarly challenges here. So anyone who's coming to market, in this one there's a bad reflection inside the shot. In this one there's that gnarly highlight, that hot light on there. So, and there's, when you go to flop the thing, I mean you can't get away with not flopping it, because it would be backwards in that frame. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to just go in here. Sorry, Richard. I know, man. Anybody who wants to stay through can probably stay. And what's up?
Can we watch the shot in motion?
Yeah, sure, of course. Yeah, you'll find that the matte key, I mean, sorry, the roto's not great. You know, the roto is the thing to clean up. But luckily, the roto is the last thing I did. And it's on top of everything else. So when I go to clean up that roto, I don't kill myself with it throws all the other work I've done unrendered and offline. What's up?
It's Brian Wilder. That's Murph's brother, right?
It's what?
Brian Murphy's brother. Yeah.
I have no idea who that is.
Yeah.
Oh, is that Murphy Doyle?
Yeah. Brian Doyle.
Oh, yeah, Brian Doyle. Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Jeez, he's put on some weight, just like me. I didn't even recognize him. That's crazy. Total coincidence that that's his brother in the picture. Thank you so much for pointing that out. All right, so what's the one thing that's broken here? Nobody knows it, but that picture is flopped. So this is the layer that has the picture on it. I'm going to step inside. There's that picture from so long ago. Right? So I'm gonna do something here, which is I'm gonna copy it, And we don't want to flop the frame, we just want to flop the picture inside itself. So I'm just going to put a 3D warp, blend 3D warp on this one, rotate 180 degrees. So, like that. And then animate that thing. This is really, really easy. Go back to key, animate, option. So double click and make sure that 3D warp is still there. Double click and make sure the color is still there. So we got this animate, and we're gonna just, oops, pick our color. I'm sorry, pick our shape, which is gonna be a rectangle, because we spent all that time squaring this thing up to camera. So that makes it so easy to cut this out. We just draw a rectangle. And we're gonna change the blending. How's that looking? Does that, if I click away like that, does that pass?
It's not sound.
That's right. Look at this. We're gonna go to, and that's the last thing I noticed last night too, and I forgot all about it today. So we're gonna go to the key and mode and change this thing. Look at that, she's right, it's not centered. So I'm gonna leave that at about 30, step inside, change that 3D warp position. God, what would I do without you, Bronwyn? It's amazing. That was you, wasn't it?
Huh?
Wasn't that you who just said it's not centered?
It's the OCD talking.
There we go. It's centered. So I go back to here, to my animate, select the shape, and make it. So I flopped the image inside the frame. Look at that. Now the image looks backwards inside this, but since when we step out, uh-oh, what did I do? I know what I did. Okay, time to quick do an emergency fix. We're gonna take these two layers, collapse them, and move them up. Now, how do I know that that's gonna fix it? Years of practice. If you're coming tomorrow and you need help with something breaking, I can help you with that. So, there it is. I'm gonna render all. And yes, you may watch it in motion, and yes, you can shit all over my Roto. But I think we've achieved something here, because we haven't just achieved a temp comp, we've achieved a new level of organization in our thinking, a new level of organization in our approach that gives us a lot of flexibility to make future changes. And we've saved all our work in such a way, if you ever have to knock something together out of like 5 different real photographed elements or whatever, and then it's time to turn it over or show somebody how you did it, man, organizing your footage like this in your temp comp is so helpful, because you always know what you're looking at, you know? And you can make the changes, you can pull the plates, you can do whatever you need to do to get the shot finished for real. Because, look at that, it's version 1 flopped, so I'm gonna call that version 2. And that's it, we got a...
How often do you find that you comp shots directly in Avid and then they just kind of never get touched again and the project just gets finished? It's like...
most of my temps never get touched again. But I get so mad when I have to make a change that I have spent a lot of time thinking about how to set this thing up so that if I do make a change, I mean, usually those things happen 5 minutes before a fucking screening. Forgive my French. And it's just painful. And that's what happened to me on my show, where I had this animal running around a tree somewhere, and The roto job was really, really bad. And somebody said, I thought you said you were going to fix that old thing before this screening for the studio executives. And I've been like comping all day, and it's like 9 o'clock at night. And I thought, how hard could this thing be? I just need to tighten up the shape around his head and, you know, get it tighter so that you're not seeing all this gack behind him. And I looked at it and it was like, it's Boris and it's Mocha. And I'm like, oh God. And had I built it myself, I would have built it in a way that anybody could change it. Anybody who knows how to work with these tools, Animat, Spectromat, you know, whatever. We didn't get to do Spectromat today, and I'm really sorry about that. I had a real big problem at the beginning of the show where I didn't know how to get into this or how long this would take. And I hope, you know, that's okay. I hope we got enough out of what you've seen. But yeah, how often do I change my temps? It really depends. If it's something where, like I did something really awesome on Pete's Dragon where we had a sequence where the dragon has an invisibility effect, and it's sort of similar to Predator, where you can sort of see him when he's moving, but when he's still, you can't see him. And the sequence kept changing, the shot order kept changing, the lengths, the performance, all this stuff. And I got so fed up with it because Weta couldn't turn it around fast enough. The editor would give me the cut and say, this has got to go to Weta right now. And I adore this woman. I mean, I want to like marry this editor. She's so wonderful. She's the favorite person I've ever worked with in my life. I just had dinner with her last week while my family was away. But she'd do this thing that would drive me crazy. She'd cut all day, give me the sequence, say, we made all these changes. It's got to go to Weta tonight. So I'd send it out to Weta with adjusted lineup sheets and a new reference QuickTime and all this stuff. And I'd give him all these notes. Change this animation. Now this shot is 8 frames shorter, so he needs to be doing this by this frame and all this stuff. And the next day, before I got the new version from Weta, and Weta was cranking this stuff out every day, new animations. Before I even got the new animations from Weta, the editor, who shall remain nameless, even though she's my favorite person in the whole world, Lisa Xenochurian, really amazing woman. Not nameless at all. She'd make more changes. She'd make changes to an animation sequence before we got the animation. So this got to a point where I said to Weta, listen, the comps you've already done, give them all to me with the background layer turned off. Give me Elliot, the dragon, animated on green screen, or on blue screen, because he's green. And I used the blue screens. I used Spectromat on these shots and the technique you just saw here to create black and white, pure black and white versions of him creeping around. And then what I did was I used that black and white holdout channel on a forest plate and on a forest plate with some blurring and rippling and other filters on it. So background plate and foreground plate are the same. Foreground plate has the shape of a dragon crawling around in black and white. Turn it with a matte key into a transparency, basically, and suddenly I have an invisible, ripply, blurry, weird-looking dragon shape crawling around in a forest that I could change length, change timing. I could step inside, and if she said he needs to hold that position a beat longer, I could hold him for 8 frames more. And that sequence I changed a lot. But most temps I do, a temp like this, I won't do again. And if the editor says, the roto, I say, come on now, dude. Do you want me to do something else? I can do something else for you instead. I can do those green screens that you're asking about. I could maybe try that wire removal. I hate those. Those take me forever. If this doesn't get the job done, yeah, I built it so that then maybe I'll give it to my assistant. I'll say, man, clean up the roto on that. And the thing is, he knows how because I've built this a certain way where it's so organized and so sensible that anybody could step into this thing and tweak any part of it. You tweak the size of the painting, you tweak the color of the painting, or photograph rather, it's also sort of infinitely tweakable without that awful ripple effect, like when you go to try to put a 3D warp and an animat together, which everyone's been trying to do for years. And when you try to do that stuff, it just breaks. It's like, wow, how do I fix this? You know. So that black and white holdout layer, I want to say, it's also incredibly helpful for green screen keying, because I just want to show you real quick. Where's my other bins? Oof. What it lets you do is, if you have a green screen, oof, all this stuff that I organized last night, I barely touched any of it. We're GS tools, okay. So here's a, what's my test hub? There we go. So, I just want you to see something here. This is a matte key, where the original footage is a really easy to pull green screen. But what I've done is I've pulled that green screen key, and then inside the green screen, so here's that Spectromat. There it is. So this is a normal green screen pulled against a white fill background. But in the Spectromat, I can turn on Show Alpha. And suddenly I've got a black and white layer. Well, what do I do with that? Here's my background. Here's my foreground. Here's the matte key effect on my black and white. Show Alpha Spectromat. And why did I do that? Well, I'm working on a big movie where I got a color timer coming in and color timing the Avid. He's color timing all my shots in the Avid for previews and stuff. He wants to be able to change the color of just her without changing the background. Well, and without affecting the compositing that I've done with the green screen. Let's monitor this layer, and you can see I can change her color without affecting all the work that I've done on the green screen, because I'm using the same black and white holdout technique. So what happens to her when I try to give her a nice warmer skin tone than what she has in the original photography? You know, if I make her a little more pink, well, that might throw, in this case it didn't, but last night when I was messing around with it, it sure did. It threw off the color of the green screen, which threw off the color of the Spectromat and made the Spectromat no good. But because I convert the Spectromat to a black and white, like that, and then drop the matte key on it, it gives me that ability to individually color time. And so we have a couple of sequences in our movie where it's structured this way. We've got backgrounds, foregrounds that are green screen, and then a matte key layer. And our colorist can come in and just do his color timing on the foreground and background layers like this. And it never affects the quality of the compositing. Whether that compositing is good or not, you know, that's another ball of wax. But so there's like I guess there's a million things I'd love to teach all of you guys, but we don't have all day. It's been 3 hours, and I thank you very much for your patience and tolerance and your interest in listening to me. I really could go on. I really could go on a lot longer. I hope Richard can get you guys to come back and talk about FileMaker or Excel or however you end up. When this becomes part of your job, how do you track your pieces? How do you track your versions? It seems like you wanted some of that. Maybe you could hang out for the next session, and maybe the people who are coming in an hour I'll manage to shorten this whole thing down. This was a bit of a dry run for me, and you guys had to suffer through some of that, and I'm sorry. But I hope it's been interesting, and you know, there's so much more to show you guys. I mean, there's like this. I discovered a way to. You know, we have footage sometimes that has these tracking markers, like this blue thing, and people normally paint those out, don't they? But the truth is that spot color effect that I used to change the highlight on that frame, that can be used on something like this, and you can use something called magic mask. If anyone's ever wondered what that magic mask does, you can use either spot color or paint or animate or any number of these. They're all the same effects. Spot color, paint, animate. They're all shape drawing, shape tracking, shape animating effects. They were all introduced at the same time many years ago. So on a shot like this, what you do is you draw the shape around there, and then you tell it you want to adjust the color of that from red over to green or blue or whatever, so that it's keyable. And what happens is when this footage, when she walks in front of that thing, your magic mask, you tell it the color change, I only want it to do to blue. So you end up with something like this where that blue thing is gone and I haven't put paint on it. I haven't painted it out. I haven't covered it up in any way. I've put a box over it that tells the Avid everything within that box, shift it toward green, but only shift the blue. So if I make that box, that's my spectrum at, here we go. Well, I want you to see how this works, and then I'll let you guys go. So, see that little box that I drew around that thing? This is the paint effect, but I'm not painting that because my box can get bigger or smaller. And the mode that I've chosen is color match, but I'm telling it only target that blue. And in the color match mode, I want to change that blue over to green. So if this thing, let's say she were to walk in front of that thing, I was really hoping, I was actually going to track in fake tracking markers to this shot so that I could show you how this works. If she walks in front of that thing, and you're normally moving your paint around her and tracking and changing the shape of your paint objects when you're painting these stupid markers out, you don't have to do that anymore. Because this box that's changing that blue to green, that box, that shape can be right over her. And there it goes. See, it's turning her strap green a little bit because her white shirt is actually white balanced blue because it's picking up the sky. So I would just change the parameters on the magic mask so that it doesn't have as much gain. Oh, but then I'm losing the edges there. Well, then maybe I need to make this thing a little smaller, but you get the idea, right? So there's one last thing I wanted to say, which is when you're planning your work and thinking in an organized fashion before you start your comp, I want to harken back to that first ever rotoscoping job I ever did, which was when the guy asked me, can you change that to that red shirt to gray or black and white or whatever? And I spent hours and hours tracing it out, and you know, I superimposed, I desatted the whole shot, made the animat around his moving body, superimposed that over the original shot, and then of course when people passed in front of him, you know, this is how I should have done it. I should have drawn a big ass shape around the guy and just followed him and told it magic mask red and change red to gray, desat red. And it doesn't matter if they pass through that shape, if that shape passes over them, as long as they're not wearing something that's very close to the red that he was wearing. The shot is done in like 5 minutes instead of 6 hours. And So what I wanted to say is that if you are, the temps that I want you guys to do is temps, like when you're asking yourself, what's the utility of doing this temp? Think about the utility of doing it for the show, but also think about the utility of doing it for yourself. Do the shots, if you have a choice, do the shots that you don't know how to do, but try to come up with a plan for them. And when you're making that plan, use Wikipedia, use the forums, and use your friends. Call your friends and say, I just got asked to do X, Y, Z. Wikipedia.
Does that have like
Sure.
tips?
Where do you think I learned what a holdout mat is?
Wikipedia?
Yeah. Why not?
I don't know.
Yeah. There are resources available to you. So use them. And to that end, I am going to offer up my phone number to anyone who wants it. You may call me when you're on a show and you have a tough comp, call me. I won't pick up, but I'll listen to the voicemail. And then I might call back. I don't pick up.
If a tree falls in the forest and nobody sees it, that's
No, I want to offer that to you guys, and I think you should all make sure you offer it to each other, and you think of each other first. When it's time to do something you've never done before, don't be afraid of trying something new and hard. Think to yourself, what's my plan of action for this? For doing something I dread doing, or maybe there's a better way, maybe there's a way I don't know about. Maybe there's somebody I can call. Maybe I know a visual effects editor, or just an assistant editor with more visual effects experience, or whatever. Make that call before you save yourself some pain. I'm sure you can contact the Guild, and I'm happy to have the Guild put you in touch with me.
Do you recommend any tutorials or anything?
Say again?
Do you recommend any tutorials or anything like that? Or?
I don't know, YouTube. I mean, I got the Guild offers some kind of thing for Linda.
Yeah.
It's okay.
It's pretty primitive. I mean, I got really excited about that, and then I started doing it, and I thought, oh, this is the stuff that could have helped me in 2008. It doesn't help me where I am now so much, but Bronwyn can help me. Bronwyn Shields is one of the business's best visual effects editors, and she's a friend of mine and somebody that I would reach out to if Mark Helfrich asked me to do something I've never done before and I cannot come up with a plan. I don't know how to organize my thoughts, organize my approach, organize my elements before diving into 8 hours of comping, only to have him turn around and say, this sucks. I mean, I love the guy, but he is hard on temp comps. Luckily, his first assistant does all of them, and I don't do any of them. That's not true. I do some of them. I do the ones that the first assistant cannot do. But really, Mark and his first assistant have worked together for many years, and he loves to go to his first assistant and say, I've got this idea, let's kludge together, let's Frankenstein these pieces. And his first assistant, who's been doing this thing for 30, 40 years, this is now how he keeps his job fun, is by temp comping. So he's happy to do it. But when he can't do something, he comes to me to figure it out. When I can't do something, maybe I'll go to Bronwyn. There's always somebody out there who's much better at what you do than you are. So, yep.
And has this kind of process been exclusive to Avid, or have you been forced to work in other NLEs where you had to kind of use?
I knew somebody was going to ask about Premiere. I want to learn it, but not because I want to learn it. I want to learn it. For example, Lisa Zeno-Churgan and David Lowery, the director of Pete's Dragon. This was a best experience of my entire career. I mean, it was dream job every single day. I was like driving to work with a smile on my face, even on 3 hours of sleep a night. And David.
Is that a feature or a series? What is it?
Pete's Dragon. It was a feature from Disney that came out last year. A little movie, according to them, with a budget of $75 million. Visual effects budget was $20 million, 1,100 finished visual effects shots. That is a little movie these days for a big studio like Disney. And post was long. I was on that show for 15 or 16 months total.
Does a great job.
And we had a huge crew. I mean, I had multiple assistants, I had compositors, it was big. just not as big as the one I'm on now, or the one I just did. I just was on Power Rangers, and that was like just absurd. But I was an
I was in
assistant.
the first one.
Huh?
I was in the first
Oh,
one.
wonderful, wonderful.
In the first one.
Yeah, one of my mentors, a visual
The
effects
first one,
supervisor
like,
named Eric Henerey, was the VFX supervisor on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers,
Yeah,
which is just wild
Fox.
to me.
Oh, I know about that.
But yeah, I was the assistant VFX editor on, and actually for years I've been asking people to hire me as an assistant visual effects editor because I want to learn from the people who have more experience than me. And Bronwyn, I don't know if you'll remember this, but there was a time when I was looking for an assistant on Pete's Dragon, and you wrote to me to say, well, you know, I'm available.
Okay.
And this is the thing, right? There's no place for ego in any of this. Bronwyn has so much more experience than I do. It was a luck of the draw that I got that job. That she might have been willing to work for me as an assistant would have been an unbelievable blessing. She's strong with the database, she's strong with all of it. She's probably better at all of it than I am. I just came off of Power Rangers where somebody finally gave me a shot as an assistant VFX editor. I mean, I wanted to work on one of those gigantic movies as an assistant VFX editor. See, hey, do you guys know how to do this stuff? Do you do it even better than I do? You know, all this stuff. So, you know, your friends, everyone in this room, I hope some of you make new friends today. You know, I hope you will consider me a new friend. And I will help you in the future. We really, all the pressures of our job, you know, you're an assistant editor, now you gotta learn how to do a green screen. Now you gotta learn how to do rotoscoping. Now you gotta learn how to do motion tracking, stabilization, paint out, clean up, wire removal, all of it. Guess what I don't like doing? I hate doing sound. I love cutting dialogue. Love cutting dialogue. I hate building beds of sound and designing new, you know, phaser.
I'm your sound editor.
You know why I don't like to do that stuff? Because it all gets thrown away.
It's true, but they don't
It should be
understand
thrown
that.
away.
It should be. They should, of course. But they also throw this stuff away. But the thing is, when I'm doing it, I feel like I'm really making a big impact on the movie. But I do have a huge creative outlet. I know I'm never going to make picture editor. I think. I don't know. Can I say I know? I wish I would. But in the meantime, I got to make a living, and I got to try to have fun doing it, and I'm having fun doing it. So to answer that question about Premiere, David Lowery, the director of Pete's Dragon, he's had a new Peter Pan greenlit at Disney like a year or two ago, and he wants to do Peter Pan at Disney. And I said, dude, I really want to do it. I hope you hire Lisa again to cut it. This has been the dream job of my life. If I ever get to do it again, it'll be it. I mean, this is what I want in my life, is to work on shows like this with people like you. And he goes, yeah, cool, you know, I'd love to have you. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, man, this guy likes Premiere. He tried to twist Lisa's arm to do Pete's Dragon on Premiere.
Why?
Because that's what he comes from the indie world where he uses Premiere. And guess what? Lisa is now cutting his next feature. He's doing a tiny little indie feature. And she's cutting it on Premiere. And she had to hire a special Premiere assistant. And so if I want to work with those people again, maybe I got to learn Premiere. I don't want to, but I want to.
So you're saying the new directors are all coming from India, coming from Premiere, so we better like start.
Yeah, Premiere is the Final Cut of 10 years ago. I did learn Final Cut. The good news is I never had to use it afterward.
Yeah, but I mean, like, didn't they cut
Deadpool was on Premiere.
And they had like their top engineer.
Yeah, no, it's a nightmare. It's a
room.
nightmare.
Yeah.
Because
It's
it's
a
not
nightmare.
equipped to do big
It's
movies.
not equipped.
No, it's
None of
just
these
to
things
do
are
Mickey
equipped.
Mouse movies.
Avid's the only thing.
Of course.
It's the only one. Get good at your Avid. Let's keep this product alive. Let's support it. Let's push to have new versions. And we all know how good it is. You know, a few years ago, you know, before things got a little crazy with the amount of work I was doing, working at DNX 115 and everything, I can remember just sitting in my Avid going, man, I love this toy. It's so cool. I can't believe I get paid these kind of dollars to play with this computer toy. It's like a game to me. Now, not so much. Now, I'm working on a 5-year-old, you know, 2012 Mac Pro Tower, It's a POS, and I love all the new features in Avid 8. I wish I could go back to Avid 5 for stability and speed. I wish I could go back to Unity, because I think ISIS is garbage. It's been a nightmare. I was on a show that switched from Unity to ISIS midstream, and it was like running into a brick wall. And I didn't know at the time. We switched locations, we switched facilities and vendors, and at the same time we switched from, you know, and so I thought it was like the new machines. And I was going to the first assistant, and I was like, what is this? And this vendor sucks, you know, this machine, what a POS. And he's like, oh no, that's like newer and got more RAM and a faster chip and everything than your old Avid. I said, well, what the hell's the problem, dude? Why? It's beach balling all the time. I click around in the timeline and it's so unresponsive. The pinwheel. And you know, I work really fast. Like if I'm comfortable, I'm going to with my keyboard. I try to use the keyboard as much as possible. I mean, when you punch in 6 keystrokes and then you have to sit there and watch this thing go through each one, that's painful and it kills my productivity. And it makes it so that actually I have to find fun in other parts of this
But you
job
know what
now.
I try to do when that happens is I close all the bins and just keep the bin that with the only one sequence I'm working on.
I
So
can't
when
do
it
that,
saves,
unfortunately.
When it saves, it's faster.
Yeah. Well, my bins on my project that I'm on right now, I have a video on my phone of one of my bins taking 7 minutes to close. And when that happens multiple times a day, it's just brutal. So I hope Avid will get with the program. I hope that they will revamp their code base, because their code base is very old. It's just been patched and patched and patched with each version.
Rewrite everything again.
They need to
Just
start from scratch.
Whatever
They need to start from scratch. And Apple, I mean, I started asking around at work. I was like, can we go to PC? Can we go to PC? I hate those things. I hate Windows. I love how fast those things are. They're fast. They are so much faster than Mac Pros. And, you know, my post super's like, do we need to get you a trash can? It's not going to help. It's not going to help. Yeah, I mean, everyone know what a trash can is? It's that more recent MacBook Pro. Even that thing's 4 years old. Come on now, dude. If Apple can't get with the program, if Avid can't get with the program, we're going to be in a pickle, and I'm going to have to know Premiere. So, yeah. And from what I hear, the strengths of Premiere are the things that are making Avid not so fun for me lately. How slow that Avid is, how out of date the hardware is, how dated and crusty and musty and dusty the code base is. But everything else about Premiere, the tools, the organization, the media management, the collaboration, that's why we stay away from it. So
the thing that I see with it too is Avid is so old, you run into software and hardware incompatibilities, and Premiere is so new, you run into software and hardware incompatibilities.
Totally. Any other questions? I mean, I'm sorry, I could talk all
Quick
day.
question, you said you like to stay on Unity. To that note, how do you get around the hardware incompatibilities with, USB 3 and Thunderbolt, or do you just not worry about that?
You mean like on the fact that my tower is a 2012?
Yeah, like if you had had to import something.
Well, so
because I'm transferring something off of Unity right now, and I started last week, and it's almost done tomorrow.
what are you copying it down to, like a FireWire drive or something?
The tower is limited to USB 2.
Oh, well then you're.
And I've got to migrate from a Unity to some other facility.
There's nothing like the FireWire on that tower. So luckily, I mean, I will say I benefit from working on shows where I throw my weight around. I want to advocate to all of you guys, throw your weight around. You've earned it. You are in the union.
100 pounds. I'm less than 100
Okay.
pounds.
And I won't tell you what I weigh. Working these hours has been very bad for my health. But ask for something. You know, ask for better equipment, ask for an assistant, ask for a visual effects editor, ask for a temp compositor to help. Ask, and also push. And so I'm lucky in that my tower, even though the tower is from 2012, I do have a card in it that has USB 3 ports. And on another show, I asked them to put a, what do you call it? What's the eSATA? I had them buy me an eSATA card for, I don't know what, a couple $100 and put it in. and that thing was blazing fast. So I could move media around back and forth. And you know, it's like now, like I hate working on sound, but they still bring, when they set up my system, they bring that huge Mackie thing. I'm like, dude, can we get rid of it?
Big knob.
So we buried that it's in my Logoi, and I said, buy me just a knob. And they said, what are you talking about? I said, I just want a knob. So I found something on Amazon for like $100, and it's just a knob. It's like this big, and it's so nice and smooth, and has just the right feel. And it just sits on my desk, and it's a knob for $100. And you could probably ask for that kind of thing on your shows. And so if your computer is too slow to transfer media at the speed that you need, I mean, have you asked for?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
And they're sticking it to
They
you.
don't have the money.
Well, everyone's got to work. You got to work. You got to pay your bills.
Oh no, they don't mind the amount of time that it's taking.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Well, then they're paying you money.
Yeah, no, I don't mind that at all.
These people, everything's upside down with producers. I gotta say, it's crazy, man. The way they think about money it never makes any sense.
No, they know the limitations, and they're like, it's what we have.
Yeah.
We cannot get anything.
I've gotten paid more for my hourly rate. I've gotten paid more to temp a shot than the thing got cost. Because I'm, you know, muddling through Avid trying to fix something that like the online guy can do in 10 minutes. I mean, when I was on a TV show, we paid $150 for certain shots that I know I spent. I mean, they paid me more than $150 in my hour.
But they didn't use your shot.
Huh?
But they did not use your shot.
Oh, they might have, because I've sent it there, you know, but it's like, he could have done it without all my hacking. He probably still could have done it in 10 minutes or whatever.